Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the world of veils, whispers, and the quiet hum of danger behind painted screens. Imagine being one of dozens, sometimes hundreds of women, all dressed in gauzy silks, carefully trained to smile just so, walk a certain folie, speak only when spoken to, all for the favour of one man. Welcome to the imperial harem where love is strategy, beauty is currency, and freedom is just a story someone told you once. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean, we're about to spend 30,000 words together and all I ask is a click. Fair, right? Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from night owls across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and the air smells like sandalwood and flower water. It's dark, but not quite. A lantern hangs low, casting warm golden halos on the embroidered walls. Silk rustles near your ears, not from movement, but from the curtains hanging around you, heavy with brocade. You're not in your bed. You're not even in your home. You're in the inner palace now. The back of your neck is shaved bare, your hair is twisted into a coil laced with pins you weren't allowed to choose, and your name is gone. You're not a person anymore. You're property. The harem, or inner court, exists in many empires across history. China's Forbidden City, the Ottoman Topkapi Palace, Mughal forts and beyond. But the rules are eerily similar. You live inside a golden cage. You're sequestered from the outside world, part prisoner, part pampered pet. The men who walk these halls are few, most are eunuchs, most are watching you. You've been brought here not for who you are, but for what you might become, a potential vessel for imperial blood. But before that, you're just another blossom in the Emperor's garden. And let's be honest, some blossoms get trampled. There's a saying inside the court, a new flower blooms, an old flower wilts. It's not just poetry, it's a warning. Every new concubine who arrives means someone else is closer to being forgotten, or worse, banished, poisoned, or quietly retired to a nunnery or some cold stone manor on the edge of nowhere. In this place, a smile can be lethal and silence is often the safest choice. Your arrival is not subtle. You've been chosen, selected, hand-picked based on your age, your skin, your posture, your ability to recite classic poetry without stuttering. There was an audition, though no one dared call it that. Your family likely considered it an honour, perhaps even paid for the privilege. You're 14 or 15, maybe 16 if your village is remote and your family poor. Too old and you're just part of the scenery. Too young and you're not yet useful. Right now, you're ideal. Which is a problem. You sit in a row of other girls, some are trembling, some are pretending not to. One looks like she's about to vomit into her sleeve. You sit still even though your knees feel like melting sugar. An older woman with skin like rice paper walks past you slowly, her eyes scanning every face, every hairline, every sign of defiance. Her name is irrelevant, but her position isn't. She's a senior consort, and her word can ruin you before you ever meet the Emperor. You hear a soft metallic jingle with each of her steps, the sound of keys. One of the eunuchs beside her carries a scroll. It's your names, or rather, the ones they gave you. Plum, blossom, willow branch, moon orchid. All very poetic, all completely made up. You're told to bathe, and by bathe, they mean stripped, scrubbed and perfumed under the eyes of other concubines and eunuchs, who note everything. Freckles, scars, mole placement, nothing escapes documentation. One girl cries when they cut her braid, another one faints. You manage to stay upright, mostly because you don't know what else to do. You feel like your old self is floating somewhere above you, watching this happen, unwilling to land again. At night, your new quarters are simple but stifling. The bed is small, the sheets are clean but scratchy. The walls don't just hold heat, they hold secrets. There are no mirrors, only polished bronze. You're not supposed to look at yourself too long. Vanity is frowned upon unless it pleases someone else. You lie there, staring at the silk canopy, hearing the muffled sobs of another girl down the hall, and you wonder, is this it? Is this what glory looks like? You remember your mother crying, though she tried not to. You remember your father pretending to be proud. You remember your younger brother hiding behind the door, too afraid to say goodbye. And now you're here. You feel like a doll. Not the porcelain kind, the stuffed kind. Heavy, quiet, bendable. Historically, women in this position varied wildly in fate. Some rose to unbelievable heights, like Wu Zetian of the Tang dynasty, who went from low-ranking concubine to empress. Others? They were never remembered, never named. They lived and died in silence. Some harem women were literate and politically astute, even wielding significant power behind the scenes, but many, just faces in the background of another emperor's reign. There's one whispered story about a concubine who feigned madness to avoid the emperor's touch. She supposedly spent 30 years pretending to chase butterflies in the palace garden. No one knows if it worked. No one knows her name. The debate among scholars, even now, is whether harem women had any real agency. Were they pawns, players, survivors, or all three at once? Some modern historians argue that within these strict, suffocating walls, women found clever ways to exert influence, through gossip, fashion, poetry, and the fine art of birthing the right baby at the right time. Right now, though, none of that matters to you. You're just trying to keep breathing, keep quiet, and not draw attention. Because attention here is a double-edged sword. Sure, it might lift you into favour, but it might also land you face down in a koi pond or sipping medicinal tea with surprising side effects. You finally drift off to sleep, the scent of jasmine in your hair, the echo of distant music floating through the halls. Tomorrow your training begins. Morning comes not with sunshine, but with bells, 3 short chimes and a longer one soft but firm like a lullaby, written by someone who wants you alert, not soothed. You open your eyes slowly. A eunuch stands just beyond the gauzy curtain that surrounds your small bed. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. You rise even though your legs protest, and slide your feet into silk slippers lined with rabbit fur. The tile floor is cold enough to remind you that dreaming is over. Welcome to your new routine. Before you can think, you're ushered into the washing hall. There's no privacy, but there is order. Bathing here isn't a ritual, it's a performance. Several girls already kneel on polished stone benches, while attendants pour buckets of warm water laced with chrysanthemum petals down their backs. You sit, you scrub, you do not speak. Eyes down, spine straight. Someone once said, "The body of a concubine belongs to the emperor, but the discipline of a concubine belongs to herself." You try to remember that, even as someone unceremoniously rubs salt paste into your elbows. You were a farmer's daughter not long ago. You rose with the sun to feed chickens, sweep floors, carry buckets. The smell of dirt and sweat and smoke clung to your clothes. Here, dirt is forbidden, sweat is discouraged, and if you smell like smoke, it better be incense. The difference is dizzying. But the strangest part isn't the gold trimmings or the eunuchs, or the fact that you're never alone. It's how quickly you forget what freedom tasted like. After bathing, you're handed a pale yellow robe, trimmed in silk thread. Not too bright. Colours are a hierarchy here. Only senior concubines can wear scarlet or deep jade. You're still pond scum level. Yellowish means new and not terribly important. It matches your mood. As you dress, a thin girl beside you whispers her new name, Jade Flute. You nod politely. She'll forget it next week when someone else takes her place. The next hours blur into training. A tall woman named Mistress Seema stands at the head of a courtyard with 4 assistants behind her. Her face is pinched like an unused fan, her voice sharp enough to slice fruit. She teaches you how to walk. Yes, really. You're told to glide, not stomp. Your knees must bend, but barely. Your arms hang like willow branches. You repeat this again and again, until your calves burn. She stops you mid-step and tilts your chin upward with a slender rod. "You walk like a goose," she says. "Try harder." Next, posture. You balance porcelain discs on your head while kneeling, back straight. Someone cries when her bowl falls and shatters. No one reacts. Crying is common. You feel it bubbling in your chest, but you bite the inside of your cheek and hold the line. There's etiquette too, when to bow, how low, which titles to use for which level of consort. It's like learning another language, only this one could get you slapped if you get the syllable wrong. For example, don't call the senior concubine madam. She's a noble lady of the 4th rank. You mess it up once, and you'll find yourself scrubbing the laundry pools for a week with the maids who didn't make the final cut. You eat lunch in silence. Rice, pickled greens, a small bit of fish. Nothing too rich. You're not a favourite yet. That means no sweets, no roast duck, no special soups sent over from the imperial kitchens. You catch sight of a higher-ranking concubine walking past your table, trailed by 2 handmaidens and carrying a peacock feather fan. She looks down her nose at you like you're one of the lacquered bowls. Not offensive, just unworthy of notice. Once, during a break, you You sneak a glance out the tiny octagonal window near the bathing corridor. Outside, the world is still moving. Servants hauling baskets, lanterns bobbing on poles, scribes walking quickly with scrolls under their arms. Somewhere beyond this maze of walls, someone is laughing. You feel like a shadow trapped in a painting. Later that day, they teach you how to pour tea properly. There's a specific angle for the wrist, an exact placement of the thumb. Too much steam? It's rude. Too little? It's cold. You're told to imagine you're offering the first cup to the Emperor himself. Not that you'll see him anytime soon. Rookies don't get invited to the bedchambers for at least a month. Usually. Some girls pretend to be thrilled by that delay. Others dread it. Either way, it's coming. If not tonight, then someday. The unspoken rule: if you're chosen, you go. If you don't please him, you disappear. It's worth noting that historical records, especially from the Tang and Ming dynasties, mention concubines being taken into the palace as early as age 12, sometimes younger. Training could last months or years, depending on the dynasty and how strict the court was. In some cases, girls were promoted without ever meeting the emperor, solely based on connections, poetry, or just looking like his dead wife. Scholars argue about whether some women could refuse to go to his chamber. Most agree probably not. The quirky bit: in certain dynasties, concubines were ranked not just by beauty or behaviour, but by seasonal themes. Spring girls, summer girls, even nightingale girls. Imagine being sorted like Hogwarts, except no magic, just seasonal perfumes and the hope you don't get to typhoid. By evening, your legs ache and your back feels like it's been carrying firewood since sunrise. You're allowed to walk around the central lotus pond, supervised of course. The water is still, almost too perfect, and a few golden fish flick their tails lazily near the surface. You lean on the railing and take a breath, the first real one all day. It smells like water lilies and old wood. Back in your quarters, a maid named Yun folds your robe and hums a lullaby from the South Provinces. You ask her, quietly, if she misses home. She looks up at you, surprised. "I don't remember it," she says simply. Then she sets your slippers by the bed and leaves. The lantern is blown out. Darkness takes over. But in your mind you see your village again. The crooked fence, the plum tree by the well, your mother peeling onions, your brother running barefoot in the mud. You try to keep that image alive because you know each day he will scrape another detail away. Tomorrow they'll test your handwriting. You don't know yet that the ink is full of powdered pearl. You wake before the bell this time, your body already anticipating the call. The silk sheets feel more familiar now, though they still cling a little too tightly to your skin, as if reminding you this place isn't home. You sit up slowly, rubbing the creases out of your face. The ceiling above is painted with lotus blossoms and flying cranes, symbols of purity and longevity, which is almost hilarious considering how short some of these careers turn out to be. The morning routine begins again. Bath, robe, tea, and silent marching in formation across the polished tiles to the training hall. But today there's a shift in the atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable. Eunuchs seem sharper, more alert. The senior consort walks past with a little more snap in her step. Even Mistress Sima is wearing extra jewellery. You sense it before anyone tells you. Inspection is coming. You don't know what that means exactly, but judging by the whispers darting like moths around the courtyard, someone important is making the rounds today. The Emperor? No. He doesn't stoop to look at trainees, but maybe a royal consort, or the dowager. Either way, it's a performance day. Before breakfast, a man enters the training courtyard. He's tall, skeletal thin, and dressed in crimson and black silk robes with a phoenix embroidered across the chest. His face is powdered like he's halfway to the grave already, and his eyes are blank, neutral but watchful. He doesn't bow. Everyone else does. You don't know his name, but you learn fast that he's the chief eunuch of the inner court. His reputation walks in before he does. Master of protocol, guardian of the Emperor's secrets, and, most relevant to you, keeper of the inspection registry. The registry is where everything about you is written. Your background, your body, your progress. And today, he's adding to it. You're led into a side hall one by one. Inside, the walls are lined with scrolls, brushes, and strange tools made of polished bone and carved jade. You kneel on a cushion and wait, your hands trembling in your lap. When it's your turn, the eunuch beside him begins calling out details. Height, 5 she, 2 complexion, pale gold, teeth, even. eyes, symmetrical, posture, adequate. Then comes the part you were warned about but hoped was exaggerated. A screen is pulled around you and you're asked to remove your robe. Your hair is unpinned and inspected. A matron checks for scars, birthmarks, or any imperfections that might disturb the emperor's delicate sense of aesthetics. You try not to flinch when the brush of cold fingers runs down your back. You fail. She notices. You feel your future shift slightly downward. This inspection isn't about your health, it's about your market value. The historical record is blunt. Women in the imperial harem were ranked, inspected, and categorized like prized livestock. Some dynasties had literal beauty rankings, scales and scores recorded in books. In the Ottoman Empire, concubines were paraded for the Valida Sultan's approval. In Ming China, women were chosen annually for their freshness, as if they were fruit. One record mentions a concubine dismissed for having a laughing line too deep. Imagine losing your status over your smile. And here's a fringe fact you didn't ask for. In some palaces, they use something called a measuring stick to check proportions. Shoulder width, hip size, even the space between your toes. No, we're not kidding. Scholars debate how common this was, but at least a few records mention wooden rulers and calligraphy brush measurements. It's objectification at its most literal. After your inspection, you're redressed and sent to the ink room. It's quieter here, cooler. Long wooden tables line the floor, and there's a scent of sandalwood, old paper and pearl dust. A tray is set before you, brush, inkstone, and a scroll of blank rice paper. You're to write a classic poem, nothing too ambitious, just 4 lines in regulated verse. But your hands are still shaking from the inspection. The brush tip feels slippery. You focus. The brush glides. You write the first character too thick, the second too small, third one bleeds slightly. By the fourth, your breathing evens. It's not perfect, but it's not a disaster. Mistress Seema examines your scroll. She makes a humming sound. Could be approval, could be indigestion. Hard to say. Literacy is a status weapon in the harem. Many concubines are illiterate, especially the younger ones pulled from villages. But if you can read and write, even a little, it places you one step above. A concubine who can compose poetry might have a better chance at being noticed by scholars and court. Maybe even the emperor himself, if he's the brooding artistic type. Spoiler, most emperors aren't, but they do like pretending. In the afternoon, you practice music. You're handed a pipa, a 4-stringed instrument that feels like holding a wooden baby dragon. You've never touched one before. The strings bite your fingers. You learn to strum a simple tune badly while another girl near you plays with annoying precision. She's probably from a noble family, she probably had tutors. You hate her a little bit, then hate yourself for hating her. The sun begins to dip behind the high palace walls, casting long shadows through the training courtyard. Another day nearly over. You feel as though you've survived something, but you're not sure what. An evaluation, a ritual, an audition for a play you didn't know you'd been cast in. That night, Yoon, the quiet maid who hums lullabies, brings you a surprise, a sugar plum wrapped in lotus leaf. It's slightly dried out, but still sweet. She doesn't say where she got it. She doesn't need to. You eat it slowly, one bite at a time, savouring the taste of something that doesn't belong to this place. You lie in bed, heart still beating a little too fast from the day's inspection. You stare at the ceiling cranes again. They haven't moved, but somehow they seem closer tonight. A question lingers in your head, soft but persistent. What will they write in the registry next time? You're up before the bell again, though you pretend not to be. It's easier to lie still in the dark and enjoy those last few moments when no one expects anything from you. Not grace, not poetry, not the ability to pour tea without the leaves touching the lid. But when the chimes start, soft and sequential like a tune only the palace knows, your eyes open fully and you let your breath journey. Another day begins. You already know the robe they'll hand you. Same shade of muted gold, same threadbare lining, same tiny snag at the hem you're not supposed to mention. You also know the exact number of steps from your room to the main corridor, the way the floor creaks slightly near the southeast pillar, and how the woman who walks in front of you always smells faintly of camphor and regret. You're learning the rhythms now, the morning bath, the tea, barely steeped but always served like it was made of pearls, the kneeling exercises, the endless walking drills. But today, something new is added to the roster. Rank orientation. That's what the eunuch calls it, anyway. Really, it's a reminder that your worth here is subject to a finely tuned hierarchy that stretches from the heavens to your very slippers. You're gathered with the other junior concubines in the lacquered reception hall, sitting on floor cushions too flat to be comfortable. Before you is a scroll, unrolled dramatically by two eunuchs. It's a diagram, a literal ranking chart of the imperial harem. You don't get to keep it. That would be too easy, but you're expected to memorize every title, every tier, every proper form of address. And yes, there will be a test. At the very top of the chart is the Empress, of course, the legal wife of the emperor, the one who actually counts in the lineage. Beneath her are the imperial consorts, the noble consort, the virtuous consort, the pure consort, the worthy consort, and below them, everyone else. That includes you. You're not even close to the lower third yet. You're still selected talent, one of the unnamed girls with no title, just a number in a room. Above you are women with names like Elegant Lady of the 7th rank, or Beauty of the 5th rank. All very poetic, all completely terrifying. The lecturer today is an older eunuch with a voice like wind in a tomb. He explains that promotions happen through imperial favour. That means catching the emperor's eye, though how exactly you do that is kept purposefully vague. Smile, but not too much. Laugh, but not louder than your betters. Be modest, but intriguing. Innocent, but not clueless. It's like being asked to stand still while performing an interpretive dance. And then he says the line you'll never forget. A concubine without favour is like a lantern without oil, ornamental, but soon discarded. You glance sideways at another girl. Her face is perfectly still, but her hands tremble slightly on her lap. In some dynasties, the rankings went even deeper. The Qing court, for instance, had 8 distinct levels below Empress, and each came with specific privileges: the number of servants allowed, the size of one's chamber, access to silk instead of cotton. Higher ranks meant better food, more jewellery, and the very rare privilege of leaving the inner palace under escort. Lower ranks meant you might spend 10 years without a single audience. No visitors, no advancement, just sitting, aging, and waiting. There's a fringe story from the Joseon court in Korea about a concubine who stayed at the lowest rank for over 20 years. When asked what she did during her time, she reportedly replied, "I stitched clouds onto curtains and learned to hear mice walk." Historians debate whether that's poetic exaggeration or the most depressing resume ever written. As the lecture ends, a girl raises her hand and asks, timidly, how promotions work. The eunuch pauses. "It depends," he says slowly, "on the emperor's favour, the empress's approval, the mood of the court, the alignment of the stars, and whether or not you trip on your robe." The girls laugh nervously. He doesn't smile. Later, during embroidery practice, you find yourself stitching tiny plum blossoms onto a handkerchief. Your fingers still fumble over the needle, and your blossoms look more like startled spiders, but no one says anything. Everyone's too busy glancing at the senior girls gliding past the windows. They wear green and blue now, colours you're not allowed to touch. Their hair is pinned higher, their brows shaped in elegant arches. Their laughter is soft and timed. They walk like they own the tiles. You wonder what they did to rise. You wonder what they gave up. You wonder if they ever sleep. The open debate among historians is how much power concubines really had once they reached those upper ranks. Some argue that the higher they climbed, the more influence they held, not just over the emperor, but over court policies, religious ceremonies, and foreign diplomacy. Others say it was all illusion. Power borrowed is not power owned, and the emperor could always take it back. Still, some women made it work. Consort Yang of the Tang dynasty, for example, wielded enough influence to install relatives into high-ranking positions before it all came crashing down in a rebellion. She was famously executed to appease the angry masses, but her favourite peeper song lived on, so that's something. You think of this as you thread another blossom onto your handkerchief. It's still lopsided, but at least it's not bleeding anymore. After dinner, which includes an extra dumpling for reasons no one explains, you're summoned by name for the first time. Not your real name, your flower name. Plum Blossom. You're to attend the garden reading. You don't know what that is, but everyone's watching and the other girls look impressed, which is terrifying. You're led by lantern and light to a small garden tucked inside one of the many walled courtyards. A circle of senior concubines sits beneath a painted pavilion, reciting verses under the fading sunset. One reads a poem tale about autumn rain. Another plays a guqin. You're invited to sit at the edge, say nothing, and listen. So you do. You barely breathe. You absorb every syllable, every gesture. When they finally dismiss you, one of the older women glances at your embroidery and murmurs, "Better than most." It's not praise exactly, but it lands in your chest like warmth. Back in your room, Yun waits with a fresh robe and a damp cloth for your feet. She doesn't speak tonight. You don't either. Your thoughts are too busy rearranging themselves. You understand now. This place is a chessboard. The rankings are the rules, and every time you move, you're gambling with everything. The night is restless. You dream of plum blossoms, but they're bleeding ink across rice paper. In the dream, your fingers can't hold the brush. It snaps. The ink spreads, soaking the sleeves of your robe until they drag across the floor like chains. You wake before dawn, clutching your blanket like it might fly away. For a moment you forget where you are, then the soft tap of the eunuch's sandals outside your door reminds you, this isn't your home. It never will be. Today is different. You're told as soon as you rise, prepare for your presentation. No one explains what that means, only that you'll be taken to the Hall of Harmonious Rites before sundown. Your stomach sinks. You've heard whispers from the older girls about first nights, and while no one spells it out, you can connect the brushstrokes. Presentation doesn't always mean intimacy, but it does mean proximity to power, and that alone is enough to twist your gut. The morning is a flurry of preparations, a bath scented with orchid oil, hair oiled and coiled into a more elaborate shape pinned with a carved jade comb that you're told not to lose, a fresh robe paler than usual embroidered with a faint pattern of clouds. Clouds mean mystery. Mystery, they tell you, is your best weapon tonight. You're made to kneel before the imperial grooming mistress, who carefully applies powder to your face with the precision of someone slicing fruit. Not too much blush. It's supposed to suggest modesty. Lips tinted a shade of red that's not seductive but thoughtful. Eyes rimmed lightly with charcoal dust. She adjusts your posture like she's arranging a bouquet, then steps back and nods. You'll do. The hours crawl. You're not allowed to eat anything heavy, just a bowl of warm lotus seed porridge and tea so diluted it tastes like memory. They don't want you bloated. They don't want you fainting either. You sit by the window trying to breathe evenly, your reflection shimmering in the bronze mirror. You look like someone else entirely. A polished version of a person who used to run barefoot through muddy fields. Just after sunset, 2 eunuchs appear to escort you. You follow them through winding corridors lit with amber lanterns, past arched doorways and shadowed courtyards where crickets chirp like an audience waiting. Your slippers make no sound, that's by design. In this place, even footsteps must be elegant. The Hall of Harmonious Rites is not as grand as you expected. The ceiling is low, the walls warm with candlelight, and the air smells like sandalwood and wine. You're told to kneel on a silk cushion, hands resting just so in your lap. There's a screen to your left, tall, gold-painted, depicting cranes flying over pine trees. It's the same motif embroidered on the emperor's robes, according to the legends. You can't see behind it, but you know someone is there. Time stretches. You kneel until your knees go numb. Your back stiffens, but you hold your posture. You were taught to look serene, even if it kills you. And then, a voice, deep, polished, casual, almost amused. "What's your name, little blossom?" You recite your assigned name and rank. You speak slowly, as taught, not too loud, not too shy. There's a pause, and then he says, "Have you been here long?" You haven't. You say so. Another pause. "Do you play music?" You nod. "A little." He chuckles. They all say that. You don't respond. You weren't trained for conversation. You were trained for graceful. But the silence stretches, and it becomes clear he expects more. "I'm learning the peeper," you say softly. Another pause, then, "Play something next time." The tone is warm but dismissive. You're dismissed. That's it. That was your presentation. You are not touched. You are not chosen tonight. But you're seen, noticed. Your name, your posture, your poise. They've been filed somewhere in the Emperor's vast, selective memory. And that alone changes things, because now everyone else knows. The moment you return to your quarters, the air feels different. Girls glance at you, then look away quickly. One handmaid bows lower than she did yesterday. Yoon doesn't speak, but she's already laid out your nightrobe and a soft cloth for your feet. She lights a softer lantern. No words are exchanged, but the unspoken message rings loud. You've entered a new phase, you've been evaluated, and maybe, just maybe, you've settled past. Historically, first meetings between concubines and emperors were ceremonial and coded. In the Qing dynasty, there were actual schedules, rotations, sometimes even recorded logs of who spent which night where. Eunuchs handled the logistics. It was organised like a bureaucracy because it was one. The emperor's pleasure wasn't just personal, it was political. Selecting a woman was also about balancing factions, honouring family alliances, or keeping certain clans quiet. In fringe records from the Ottoman Empire, concubines who passed their first presentations were sometimes relocated to better chambers the next morning, without being told why. They'd simply wake to better sheets, softer light, and a bowl of candied dates instead of pickled radish. One woman reportedly mistook this for punishment and wept until corrected. But you, tonight, you received no sweets, no promotion, no new robe, just silence. But silence in the palace doesn't always mean failure. Sometimes it means you've been placed on a shelf like fine porcelain waiting to be used, or broken. You lie in bed with the lantern still flickering. You're too tired to blow it out. You replay the voice behind the screen, the casual rhythm of his questions, the way his words hung in the air like incense. You don't know if he'll summon you again, but now you exist to him. You are not invisible. You're a line in a ledger, a breath behind a screen. Some girls wait years for that. You start to notice things after your presentation, small things. One morning, your breakfast porridge comes with a sliver of preserved plum, something only ranked ladies receive. The maid who serves it doesn't say anything, but her eyes flick to yours, then away. At the bathhouse, a girl you've barely spoken to offers you the better comb, the one with the sandalwood teeth that doesn't snag in wet hair. Someone else lets you go first during hair oiling. It's not kindness, it's calculation. In the palace, status is scentless, weightless, invisible, but everyone smells it. And now a trace of it lingers around you. Still, nothing's official, you haven't been summoned again. You haven't been assigned new quarters or granted a promotion. You're still just another blossom, slightly shinier now, but no less precarious. One stumble, one wrong look, one overheard remark, and all this quiet deference will evaporate. You fall into the rhythm again. Walk, bow, sew, practice. You spend hours hunched over an embroidery frame stitching delicate clouds into pillowcases. Your fingers are sore, the thread breaks often. But you keep going because you know the hands of senior concubines don't bleed anymore. Not because they don't sew, but because others do it for them. This week's curriculum includes etiquette for receiving visitors, meaning the emperor, his mother, or heaven forbid, the empress. You're taught how to kneel at 3 different angles, one for greeting, one for thanks, one for farewell. You practice until your knees ache and your balance blurs. One girl falls forward onto her face. No one helps her. The instructor doesn't even pause. Later, you practice fan gestures, how to hold it, how to close it, how to signal interest or disinterest with a flick of the wrist. A fan is not just for heat, it's a language. Tilted left means I'm listening. Tilted right, I'm ignoring you. Resting it against your cheek, dangerously flirtatious. You learn the vocabulary like your life depends on it, because in this place it might. When the emperor visits the garden that week, not to see you of course, just a general inspection, the whole harem tenses like a single muscle. You're not even near the front, but you're lined up with the others, robes smoothed, lips gently rouged, fan held at the precise angle of subdued interest. He walks past in a blur of yellow silk and confidence. He doesn't look at you, but his attendant does, and that somehow is worse. That night you can't sleep. You lie awake listening to the sound of insects outside your window and the distant plunk of a lute being played in another wing. You wonder which concubine is playing. You wonder if she played it for him. A few days later, Mistress Simar announces a test. Not in walking or tea-pouring, but in conversation. The premise is absurd. You'll be given a scenario and must respond as if speaking to the Emperor himself. Your mouth goes dry just hearing the rules, but when it's your turn, you kneel, you breathe, and you speak. The prompt is simple. The Emperor asks how you are today. What do you say? You smile gently and reply, "My heart is calm in your Majesty's presence." You don't look up, you don't fidget. You let the pause hang in the air just long enough to imply you could say more, but won't. Seema nods. The next girl tries to copy you and adds a joke. she's scolded immediately. No one laughs. Historical records show that imperial concubines were often expected to be conversational ornaments, able to speak, recite, or entertain, but never too much. Being clever was risky, being gallant was safer, but being dull, that was death. Figurative, usually. One fringe tale from the Ming court tells of a concubine who dared to correct the emperor's misquoted poem. She was exiled to a temple the next day. Some say she lived out her days writing bitter verses on lotus leaves. Others say she was brought back years later, older, wiser, and somehow more beautiful. The scholars can't agree. Either way, she's remembered, which is more than most. After the exam, you're allowed a half day of leisure. Leisure in this case means being allowed to walk the plum garden path without supervision for 1 hour. It sounds luxurious, until you realise it's another test. Who do you walk with? Who do you avoid? Do you linger too long under the cherry tree where the senior concubines gossip? Do you pause to admire the emperor's calligraphy tablet, knowing you might have touched it? You walk alone, safely, carefully. At the end of the path you find yourself at a lotus pond, the water still as glass. You kneel at the edge and watch the fish move like gold ribbons through the green. You're alone for the first time in days. You close your eyes. You try to remember your brother's laugh, your mother's fingers brushing crumbs from your hair. You try to hold the image, but it slips away like the fish. That night, Yun brings you a new robe. This one is pale lavender, with a faint silver trim. You blink at it, confused. She only shrugs. "You've been noted," she says. Then she gently folds your old robe and tucks it away like a skin you no longer wear. It's not a promotion, but it's a sign. The palace shifts around you in tiny, deliberate ways. Every gesture, every glance, every robe and ribbon and rank, it all moves like a tide you can barely feel until it pulls you under. And you're learning to float. There's a new tension in your chest each morning, as if your lungs are adjusting to thinner air. Not fear exactly, more like pressure. The pressure of being watched a little more closely, of mattering just enough to be noticed but not yet enough to be protected. It's a strange, delicate space you're now floating in. You've passed the stage of being overlooked, but you're still far from the safe territory of influence. One wrong smile and you'll be feeding koi from the bottom of the pond. Today begins with another ranking ceremony. Not yours, of course, not yet, but you're brought along to observe. The high-ranking ladies are presented in full ceremonial regalia, layered in silk robes so heavy their attendants have to help them kneel. Their hair is stacked and pinned with ornaments shaped like dragons and phoenixes. Their expressions calm, composed, and about as readable as stone lanterns. You're lined up at the back, the scent of burning sandalwood thick in your nose. The emperor isn't even present, but his absence somehow makes the ceremony feel even more nerve-wracking. These women kneel for hours to receive a title, a bracelet, a silk banner embroidered with their new rank. One of them receives the title of Virtuous Lady, and even though she's barely 20, she accepts it like someone who's already exhausted. You watch closely, cataloguing every movement. The way they smile with only their eyes, the way their robes pool exactly at the edge of the mat, the way they bow just a breath longer than required. Everything here is performance, and you're slowly learning the choreography. After the ceremony, Mistress Sima calls you into a private chamber. It's small, cold, and smells like damp paper. You wonder if this is the part where they tell you you've failed without ever saying the word, but instead she hands you a scroll. It's your progress log. She doesn't speak as you unroll it. Your name, your harem name anyway, is written at the top in fine brushstrokes. Beneath that, a list. Poise, embroidery, literacy, musical ability, manners, beauty, silence. Next to each is a symbol. Not a number, palace grading doesn't work that way, but from her expression you gather that the combination is acceptable. "You have one job now," she says quietly. "Don't mess it up." That's it. That's the whole speech. Back in your quarters, you sit by the window and stare out at the garden. The plum trees are blooming. Again. It feels like they've bloomed 6 times since you arrived, even though, logically, that makes no sense. Time here loops and folds in strange ways, like silk being pleated too tightly. Yun brings your lunch and says nothing. You notice she places the tray with both hands today, a subtle show of respect. There's a small bowl of sweet tofu alongside your usual rice. That means something, but you don't know what yet. You've heard the phrase too many times by now. Your only job is not to mess it up. But what exactly does messing up look like? Tripping over your hem, speaking too loudly, frowning at the wrong moment. You've seen girls vanish from corridors for less. One week they're practicing embroidery next to you, the next their bed is folded and empty, their fan left behind like a ghost in the shape of wood. So you move carefully. You hold your gaze at the correct angle. You say little, but not too little. You remember which consorts prefer what kind of bow, and you never let your sleeves brush the ground. The catch, of course, is that you're still expected to be charming. They want you beautiful but humble, smart but not threatening, fertile but discreet. They want you poised and pliant and perfect, like a silk painting that moves when spoken to. You start noticing the subtle signs of others faltering. One girl, June Orchid, flubs a recitation during tea training. She forgets a line of verse, just one. The room goes dead quiet. Mistress Sima narrows her eyes. No one says anything, but the next morning June Orchid's seat is empty. Another girl, Leon Smoke, accidentally laughs at the wrong time during a conversation practice. It wasn't loud, just a sharp little exhale. But it was during a mock exchange with a pretend emperor, and that's all it takes. She's reassigned to linen folding for retraining. She used to have better hairpins than you. Now her hair is plain and pulled back like a maid's. You try not to get used to the turnover, but you do. It's survival. Evenings now come with subtle terror. The eunuchs arrive with scrolls that determine who is summoned where. Sometimes it's for music, sometimes for poetry, sometimes it is clear what the emperor intends. When they stop at your door, your breath always pauses in your throat. But they haven't stopped lately. It's been a while. Too long? That's the question now. Is silence safety, or a signal you're fading? Historically, once a concubine was noticed, her real job began. She had to stay relevant, which meant staying beautiful, staying clever, and most importantly, staying useful. That often meant pregnancy, especially in dynasties where bearing a son could lift a woman from obscurity to power. But even beyond that, relevance came from aligning with the right factions, reading the palace's unspoken rules, and playing the long game. There's a strange fringe case in the Ottoman archives, a concubine who wasn't chosen for 3 years after entering the harem. Everyone assumed she'd be dismissed. Then suddenly, she was summoned twice in a month, bore a son, and rose so quickly in rank that older consorts plotted to have her reassigned to a convent. She survived. Barely. No one knows how. You fall asleep that night with the faintest taste of sweetness still on your tongue. The tofu dessert from earlier lingers like a ghost. You wonder if it was a test, or a gift, or both. At some point you wake in the dark, the sound of rain tapping on the tiles above your head. Yuna's asleep on the mat by the door, her back to you. You don't call out. You just stare at the ceiling, heart humming like a distant drum. Your only job is not to mess it up. But no one can agree on what it even is. It starts with a glance. A girl you barely know tilts her fan toward you during music practice, her eyes flicking sideways like she's passing a secret under the table. You pretend not to notice because reacting too quickly in the harem is like stepping into a trap that hasn't even been baited yet. But later, when the practice ends and everyone begins shuffling their instruments back into embroidered cases, she lingers by your side. Not close enough to raise eyebrows, but just within reach of a whisper. "She liked your stitching," she says softly, almost without moving her lips. You blink, slow and polite. "Who?" She doesn't answer. She only dips her head and glides away, the hem of her robe whispering across the polished floor like a warning. You don't sleep well that night. Because if she means who you think it means, then it's not praise, it's surveillance. Welcome to the secret language of the harem. The silk screens may separate rooms, but they don't separate secrets. There's a whole world here made of coded gestures, phrases that mean their opposite, and gossip so weaponized it could be classified as light artillery. Fans aren't just for cooling faces, they're used like punctuation. Eyes dart like messengers. Even the direction you knot your sash can say, "I heard what you did," or "I didn't hear a thing, but I will soon." Your own fan, by the way, now bears a painted motif of cranes flying over peonies. It was assigned to you, supposedly at random, but a girl in your sewing circle muttered that peonies mean ambition. And cranes? They live a long time, but only if no one clips their wings. During mid-morning etiquette drills, you start noticing the layers beneath the surface. A small nod to a rival, but with slightly too much teeth in the smile. A compliment on a girl's hairpin that's actually a veiled insult about her status, because everyone knows that style is 2 seasons out of favour. Even brushing someone's sleeve by accident might be a signal. You're seen, or worse, you're next. You begin practicing the language yourself. You learn how to hold your fan just so, tilted, but not tilted enough to suggest arrogance. You lower your eyes with just the right amount of demure interest when a senior concubine enters the room. You adjust your sleeves when someone mentions the emperor's name, a subtle gesture that says, "I know my place." It's exhausting, but in a strange way, it's also invigorating. Like you're finally figuring out how to swim without flailing. One afternoon, you're in the garden pavilion during calligraphy study when a breeze lifts the paper from your desk. You reach to catch it, and your brush smears a dark line across the character for stillness. A mistake, obvious and messy. The girl next to you doesn't laugh. Instead, she leans in and whispers, "Some mistakes are safer than others." You glance at her. She's new, but sharp. You want to ask what she means, but she's already returning to her scroll, her brush moving in perfect, dangerous movements. That evening, Yoon is quiet as she brushes your hair. She always is, but tonight the silence feels heavier. You ask softly, "Do you ever miss home?" She doesn't look up. "There's nothing to miss once your name is taken," she replies. Then she knots your hair into a loose braid and gently places your fan beside your sleeping mat. There's a historical debate about just how structured the communication within harems truly was. Some scholars argue that it was pure improvisation, a social survival instinct born from forced proximity. Others claim the system was practically formalized, an unofficial court language made of flowers, fabrics, glances, and carefully coded poetry. In some cases, entire rivalries were conducted through gift exchanges. A comb made of ivory? Respectful. A comb made of bone? Insulting. A robe dyed too close to a senior's signature colour? That could spark a demotion. Once, according to one Qing record, a concubine gave another a poem about falling leaves. It was interpreted as a wish for infertility. A month later, she was reassigned to a remote villa for rest. You think about that as you sip your evening tea, watching the candlelight flicker against the carved beams of your room. You've started sleeping with your fan beneath your pillow. It's not superstition. It's just habit now, a soft, symbolic shield. The next morning, someone leaves a sprig of osmanthus blossoms on your window ledge. You pause, unsure. Osmanthus means autumn in poetry, but in harem code it can mean longing, or sorrow, or worse, an attempted alliance. You don't know who left it. You don't ask. You simply tuck the flowers into a cloth pau and hide them in your sleeve. If anyone asks, they were a gift from a passing servant. No one will believe it, but that's not the point. There's power in plausible deniability. You start writing poems again, not to share, gods no, but for yourself. You keep them folded beneath the floor mat, ink still slightly wet on a few of them. Tiny verses about clouds that won't stop moving, about birds that forget where the sky ends. They don't rhyme, but they keep your mind sharp. One evening during dinner, a girl makes a joke. Harmless, really, about how the pickled vegetables are as cold as the Empress Dowager's smile. Everyone laughs, even the servants. This next morning the girl's seat is empty, her room vacant, her name never spoken again. You learn the lesson quickly, even laughter must be sanctioned. By now you've mastered the silent arts, how to imply without stating, how to appear curious without being nosy, how to nod like you've heard something even when you haven't. You've become fluent in the dialect of glances and folded fans, in the exact rhythm of compliments that don't flatter too much. You are not the cleverest, or the prettiest, or the most daring, but you are becoming one of the most careful. And in the harem, careful can keep you alive. You're eating breakfast, soft rice porridge, slices of winter melon, a boiled egg cooled to room temperature, when the quiet shift in the air lands like a breath you weren't ready to hold. It begins with silence, a true one, not the ordinary hush of polite courtiers, but the kind that means someone is listening just beyond the curtain. Then it sharpens. Girls sit straighter. Bowls are set down more gently. Fans hover in place unreadable. Even the birds outside seem to pause. Someone is about to snap. You feel it before you see it, like a gust of wind before a storm. There, by the stone lantern at the edge of the courtyard, two girls lock eyes across a narrow garden path. You know them both. Not well, but well enough. Spring Reed, known for her endless hair and too sweet voice. Lotus Song, quiet, perfect calligraphy, once seen handing a handkerchief to the Emperor's brother. Not forbidden, but close. The exchange is quick. A glance, a flick of the sleeve, a step just a touch too aggressive for such delicate shoes. And then Spring Reed stumbles, just slightly. Not enough to fall, but enough to draw gasps from the maids. Her hand reaches out, touches the hem of Lotus Song's robe. The robe twitches back. No one speaks, but the damage is done, the message received. Whatever peace once existed between them is gone now. You sit still, spoon halfway to your mouth, pretending not to notice anything. This is how jealousy enters the room here. Not loud, not screaming, but like a thread being pulled through silk. Slowly, precisely, with the promise of unravelling everything. Later, during mid-morning tea service, the tension still lingers like incense. Lotus Song is nowhere to be seen. Spring Reed smiles just a little too wide, pours her jasmine tea with such grace it's almost mocking. You keep your head down. That's the rule. Don't engage, don't observe too closely, don't offer a fan or a cloth or a kind word to anyone who might be marked. Still, you wonder what it was. A whispered insult? A suspected affair? A glance in the wrong direction? Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe one of them was chosen for the Emperor's evening roster, and the other wasn't. Because jealousy in the harem isn't just personal, it's political. Every night a concubine spends with the Emperor could result in a child. And every child could be a prince, and every prince could become the next emperor. So yes, a stumble is never just a stumble. Historical records overflow with stories of rivalries turned lethal in the inner chambers. One of the most famous is that of Consort Zhao and Empress Lu, during the early Han Dynasty. When Empress Lu discovered that Consort Zhao had given birth to a son who might threaten her own lineage, she didn't settle for exile. She had Zhao mutilated, her limbs and eyes removed, then imprisoned in a pigsty. Historians still debate whether this account was exaggerated by later writers trying to villainize Empress Lu, but even if it wasn't true, it was believed. And belief is power. Even in less murderous contexts, jealousy often manifested in subtler ways. Poisoned sweets, tampered face powders, altered letters. In the Ottoman harem, some favourites were said to have their cosmetics laced with lead to dull their beauty over time. In Korea's royal court, rival concubines would secretly bribe palace physicians to issue false health reports, claiming pregnancies that didn't exist, or denying ones that did. It's not like you haven't heard rumours already. The girl 3 rooms down from you who suddenly became sick after eating red bean buns. The pair of slippers left outside a rival's door soaked in ink. The songbird that mysteriously died after being gifted by a fellow trainee. You begin to keep your things locked, even though your room is almost always guarded. You mix your own tea when you can. You watch which cups are offered to you and by whom. Yoon, who brings your food and combs your hair, notices your caution but says nothing, just nods once, as if confirming you're finally learning to breathe with your ears open. And yet no matter how careful you are, you can't predict everything. That evening, during embroidery, Spring Reed sits beside you. She's never done that before. She leans in too close and smiles. "I like your clouds," she says, referring to the pattern you're stitching. "Thank you," you reply, polite but distant. "Have you heard?" she whispers, too quietly for the chaperone to catch. Lotus Song's been sent to the southern quarters, for reflection. Her tone is light, but you hear the blade under the sugar. You keep your eyes on your needle. "That's unfortunate." "Is it?" she asks, then giggles. "You're next, to rise. You must feel the wind shifting." You shake your head, because it's the safest gesture, neither agreeing nor denying, but your fingers tremble slightly, and your stitch slants just enough to make the cloud look like it's crying. That night, your room feels colder. You pull your robe tighter around your shoulders and sit by the low table, trying to finish the pattern. You keep thinking of that smile, that stumble, that invisible line that now connects you to something you never wanted to be part of. Because once you're seen as a threat, even without trying, you are one. The open debate among scholars is whether concubines truly had enemies, or whether the structure of the harem made everyone into one by default. Was it rivalry or survival? Some believe that many of the more infamous tales of poison and sabotage were dramatised later, by male historians looking to paint the inner court as unstable and hysterical. Others argue the women of the palace played the game as ruthlessly as any general, just with better perfume. You fall asleep that night with your fan beside your pillow and a small knife tucked under your sleeve. It's not a real weapon. It's a hairpin with a sharp edge you had Yoon file down for you. She didn't ask why, she never asks. You don't expect to use it, but you sleep better knowing it's there. Because in the harem, jealousy wears perfume, and sometimes it smiles. You hear the bells before the sun rises, not the usual chimes that signal morning rituals, but something deeper, lower toned, slower. Temple bells, echoing through the palace corridors like distant thunder in a storm that hasn't quite arrived. Every girl in your corridor stirs at the same time, robes rustling, slippers tapping softly against polished tiles. No one speaks. They don't have to. You all know what this means. The Emperor is in residence tonight. Not just in the palace. He's here, in the inner court. The Hall of Treasured Harmony will be lit. The golden incense brazier, carved with dragons, will burn its rarest coils. The bedding washed and aired. The wine stirred gently so the herbs won't settle. A name will be chosen from the roster. One woman will be summoned. And it won't be you. Not because you're unpopular or unnoticed. Quite the opposite. You've been seen a little too much lately. Which means you're still on the Emperor's mind, yes, but not in the impulsive, summon her now way. You're more of a long simmer, a possibility, and that in its own way is more dangerous. When a girl is summoned, it's not as romantic as the poem suggests. No candlelit letters or soft footsteps through a moonlit garden. No silk scarf fluttering from a balcony. A eunuch knocks. That's all. One tap. Then your name. You follow. You're silent. You're scrubbed, powdered, perfumed, and led down a corridor that smells like sandalwood and sweat. You're prepped like a ceremonial offering. Tonight, it's Peony Spring. She's beautiful in that way poets get carried away describing. Pale skin like snow on plum bark, a voice like wind through bamboo, all the usual metaphors. But beneath it, she's sharp. Her eyes don't blink too often. Her movements are precise. She knows how to pivot her body just enough to catch the lantern light on her cheekbone. It's a skill. When the eunuch calls her name, she nods once, then stands. No hesitation. Her maid wraps a silken shawl around her shoulders, adjusts her hair, ornament, and then off she goes, backs her to straight, chin level, like a bride walking toward a wedding that could end in exile. And you return to your quarters and pretend you're not listening for footsteps returning. You don't expect it to bother you, but it does. You tell yourself it's not about jealousy, not the kind you felt when you were younger, competing for sweets or praise. This is quieter, deeper, a reminder that your future isn't in your hands, that one man's whim could decide everything. You spend the next day as you always do, lessons, needlework, posture drills, but the atmosphere feels heavier. Peony Spring doesn't return that morning, not immediately. She arrives late, eyes lowered, a soft flush on her cheeks. The senior eunuchs treat her differently now. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't need to. Later, during afternoon poetry recitation, she's called forward to read. Her voice is smooth, measured. The poem is a Tang classic about dew on a lotus leaf, gentle and vague, but at the final line she glances at you, just briefly. Her smile is as soft as silk. You feel it like a scratch. The politics of harem affection aren't just about being chosen, they're about being remembered. One night doesn't mean power. 2 nights, maybe. A pregnancy, that's when everything changes. But there's another game, too. The shadow game. The social chess that happens in lounges and corridors and moonlit gardens. If the Emperor favours one woman too much, the others close ranks. Envy curdles into strategy. Allies become enemies. And all of it plays out in smiles and silk and carefully timed greetings. You start to feel the current shifting under your feet. The next morning, Peony Spring receives a small wooden box. Everyone sees it. She opens it slowly, theatrically. Inside, a comb carved from mother of pearl and sandalwood. It's a gift from the Emperor. A gesture. A message. Someone snickers in the corner of the room. It's barely audible, but it's enough. Later that day, that same girl spills tea on herself during etiquette drills. She spends the next week scrubbing floor tiles outside the laundry room.
You understand now? Peony Spring isn't just rising, she's declaring herself. And anyone who gets in her way is going to feel the chill.
Historically, the harem was always a revolving door of attention. Emperors were expected to favour many women, not just for pleasure, but for politics. In some dynasties, they rotated concubines with military precision. One scholar described it as scheduled intimacy. Others disagree, insisting that emperors chose impulsively, moved by poetry, by beauty, by dreams. But no matter the system, the message was the same. If you weren't wanted, you didn't exist. There's a fringe tale from the Ottoman court about a concubine who wore a ring scented with rose oil, so that when the emperor touched her hand, the scent would linger, subtly reminding him of her. It worked, for 3 months, till another woman laced her own ring with saffron and musk. Eventually, the emperor stopped smelling anything at all. That's the thing about attention. It dulls. A week passes. Peony Spring remains untouchable. You keep your head down, you work harder. You speak only when spoken to. You know better than to engage with a rising star. You've seen what happens to those who try to chase the sun and end up scorched. But then one evening, after all the lanterns are lit and the corridors settle into stillness, a note appears. It's folded into a shape like a plum blossom, left discreetly on your pillow. No seal, no mark, but the paper is expensive and the calligraphy inside is careful, trained. It reads, "Your silence is noted. The wind shifts often. Be still and it will find you." You read it twice, 3 times. The 4th time you burn it over the candle flame. You don't need to know who sent it. You only need to know what it means. Your time might still come, you just have to survive until it does. There are ledgers for everything in the palace. Scrolls that record who walks where, what you eat, how often you sneeze. And yes, when your cycle begins. You find this out the hard way when a eunuch taps lightly on your door one morning, bows, and in a voice as casual as someone announcing the weather, asks if your monthly bleeding has begun. You freeze, not out of modesty, those days are long gone, but because the answer matters. It's not just about health, it's about eligibility. A woman who's menstruating cannot be summoned to the emperor's bed. A woman who isn't, but says she is, that's treason. And a woman who is not menstruating at all might be pregnant, which is something everyone will want to know, immediately. But you answer honestly. Yes, it started 2 days ago. The eunuch bows again and walks off, writing something onto a bamboo slip. It's that fast, that impersonal. One more biological check-in scrawled somewhere in the vast medical archives of the court. The physician arrives later, of course. Not to treat you, your discomfort is irrelevant, but to confirm. He doesn't examine you directly. That would be unthinkable. Instead, he asks questions and takes notes while Yoon presents the soiled cloth from the laundry bin with quiet, practiced efficiency. You watch this with a numb sort of detachment, sipping tea as your bodily functions become royal bookkeeping. You find yourself thinking, absurdly, about how chickens back home used to get tagged with coloured ribbons around their legs so your family could track which ones had stopped laying. You wonder if someone's drawn a symbol beside your name now, like a little red dot or a plum blossom with a frown. For the next few days, you're exempt from certain rituals. No tea service, no calligraphy demonstration, but you're not free. You're sent instead to the moonlight baths, where women on their cycles go to purify. Let's talk about the moonlight baths. They're beautiful, yes. Deep stone pools under high windows where soft light filters in like mist. But they're also lonely, quiet, reverent. The water is kept at a specific temperature and the attendants speak only in whispers. You're given herbs to soak in, mugwort, peony root, a few others you can't name. Supposedly it helps. It doesn't, but saying so would be rude. You share the bath with 2 other concubines, both silent, both equally careful not to speak first. One of them is Silverfish, a girl with a voice like honey who was once rumoured to have made the emperor laugh, which is rarer than thunder in winter. She looks at you across the steam and says nothing. Her face is perfectly unreadable. You wonder how many secrets this water holds. Menstrual tracking in the palace isn't new. In ancient China, it was common for midwives and eunuchs to maintain monthly charts for every woman in the inner court. Some emperors even carried small bone tablets inscribed with names and dates, allowing them to schedule intimacy. Not very romantic, but certainly efficient. In some courts, a missed period triggered immediate attention. If a pregnancy was confirmed, the woman's status could soar overnight, or, in rare and more sinister cases, disappear entirely if the pregnancy was politically inconvenient. There's a fringe case from the Tang dynasty, a low-ranking concubine rumoured to be pregnant with a child the empress claimed couldn't possibly be the emperor's. Her name was struck from the records. Whether she miscarried, gave birth, or was simply silenced, no one knows, but historians have noted a conspicuous blank space in the court log for that month, a gap where a name used to be. You spend 3 nights in the moonlight baths, you emerge cleaner, yes, but also quieter. Something about being surrounded by the still water and still women makes your thoughts slow down. You think about the layers of this place, not just silk and power, but biology, the way your own body can become either your leverage or your liability. You think of Peony Spring, who has now been summoned a second time, and a third. Yun greets you on your return with a fresh robe and a bowl of ginger soup. She doesn't comment on the baths, she just places a warm cloth on your seat and begins brushing your hair, murmuring a lullaby from a province you've never been to. As she works, she tells you something strange. In the old days, when a woman in the harem became pregnant, the emperor would dream of cranes. You blink. Cranes? She nods, gently untangling a knot. Always cranes, flying low, circling a lake, or nesting in a garden. It was considered an omen. You don't ask if he's dreamed of any lately. It's not your business, not yet. Still, you begin paying attention to the colours in the embroidery work you're assigned. Lots of cranes lately. Too many? Or are you just seeing patterns where there are none? After returning to your usual routine, you're given a new assignment. Daily studies with Lady Yi, a mid-ranking concubine known for her poetry and, more interestingly, for the fact that she hasn't been summoned in nearly a year. She's not bitter, just faded, like parchment left in the sun. Lady Yi teaches you how to write poems in layered metaphors. The Emperor prefers images, she says. Don't say you miss him. Say the candle burns too slowly. Don't say you're sad. Say the plum trees bloomed too early. She has a soft voice, but her eyes are sharp. You begin to write verses in your spare time. Quiet things, personal, you never show them to anyone. The open debate among scholars is whether poetry in the harem was actually a way for women to express power or just a pressure valve. Some say it was a tool, kind of coded rebellion, especially in dynasties that valued literary wit. Others argue it was nothing more than an acceptable pastime, the illusion of expression within a tightly sealed jar. Either way, it becomes part of your ritual, like bathing, like silence, like watching the scrolls for signs you can't name. As your cycle ends and you rejoin the general rotation, you find yourself more attuned than ever to the palace's strange rhythms. You hear one girl vomiting in the early morning hours. You hear a eunuch speak her name a little too gently. You see the way the physician lingers outside her chamber. You understand immediately, and she's late. And suddenly you know that everything is about to change. The first time you hear her laugh, it's so soft and sudden that you think it might be a bird outside your window. But no bird sounds like that. Light, high, and clipped short like she's afraid the walls might repeat it back to her. It's the girl who's late. Her name is Willow Whisper, and she's always been quiet. Not shy exactly, just careful, like someone walking barefoot across thin ice. You've exchanged words once or twice, mostly compliments about embroidery, but you've never seen her smile. Not until now. She laughs again the next day, this time while sipping soup in the tea hall. Just once, a little longer. Her face glows. It's not just joy, it's certainty. And suddenly she's not just another girl in soft slippers anymore. She's a womb with political potential. The shift is instant. Willow Whisper is now guarded more closely. Her meals are hand-checked by senior eunuchs. She's excused from chores, lectures, and court performances. Her quarters are relocated to a brighter room with silk curtains and quieter walls, maids double in number. And everywhere she walks, people bow just a bit lower, even though her rank hasn't officially changed. You watch all this unfold with a strange mixture of detachment and curiosity. You don't feel jealous, not exactly. You feel alert, like someone watching a storm form at the edge of the horizon. Beautiful, awe-inspiring, but very likely to knock over your roof. Her pregnancy is not confirmed publicly yet. It won't be for several more weeks after the second physician visit, a series of ceremonial bathings, and a blessing by the temple priest. But everyone knows, the smell of ginger, the way her hand rests on her stomach, the shuffle of her steps. Even her voice has changed. Lighter now, as if floating. At night in the gardens you catch snippets of conversation. The Emperor smiled when she bowed yesterday. He asked if she was comfortable. He sent her lotus paste buns, still warm. This is the moment every concubine is theoretically preparing for, to be chosen, to be impregnated, to become the mother of a prince. But what no one tells you is how quickly it turns the entire palace against you. It's not the favor that's dangerous, it's the shift in hierarchy. One morning, Peony Spring enters the bathhouse late and ignores the traditional bow toward Will-O-Wisper. It's subtle, but deliberate. Another girl accidentally spills hot tea on the edge of Will-O-Wisper's sash and offers no apology. The message is clear. Just because you might be carrying royal blood doesn't mean you're untouchable. Not yet. Still, you can feel the palace beginning to bend around her presence. The poems in the morning recitations include more spring imagery. The calligraphy assignments now feature characters related to growth and legacy. You're assigned to embroider a small swaddling cloth, not for her directly, of course, but in anticipation. You sew cranes and bamboo, your fingers trembling slightly on the silk. Historically, the stakes of pregnancy in the palace were both enormous and terrifying. In many dynasties, a pregnant concubine instantly outranked women far above her in title. An expectant mother was shielded, pampered and, if her child was born male, elevated for life. But the danger was just as high. Miscarriage was common and rarely considered a natural tragedy. It was viewed with suspicion. Accidents were often rumoured to be arranged. There's a well-known case from the Ming court, a concubine who conceived after a single night and who miscarried 3 weeks later. The court physician claimed it was due to stress, but her maid swore someone had placed bitter herbs in her soup. The emperor exiled 3 women the next day. The concubine never recovered. You begin to notice the undercurrents tightening around Will-O-Wisper. Her maid changes. Her closest friend is reassigned to an entirely different wing. You hear the shuffle of guards outside her quarters now, unusual for a woman of her current rank. She smiles less. She eats slower. Her laugh disappears. Then there's the night of the moonlight gathering, a monthly ritual where the emperor walks through the inner garden at twilight and accepts poetry, gifts, or offerings from the concubines. He rarely stays long, but his presence alone as interceptor was enough to send waves through the court. You're invited to participate. So is Will-O-Wisper. You're given 2 days to prepare a gesture. Something subtle, not too forward. Nothing overtly romantic, that would be gauche. Something poetic. You decide on a folded paper lantern with verses inside, each written in the shape of a lotus petal. Not revolutionary, but tasteful. The kind of gift that says, I'm clever but not scheming. I'm worthy but not grasping. The night arrives, the lanterns are lit early. Incense trails through the courtyards like fog. You're dressed in a robe of soft pearl grey with white embroidery. Simple, reflective, safe. Will-O-Wisper arrives late. She walks slowly. A eunuch supports her arm. She carries no gift, just herself. And somehow it's enough. The emperor pauses when he sees her. Not long, not theatrically, just enough to be seen. He doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. His silence is permission. Later, when he departs, the whisper spreads like a flame. He touched her hand. You know what that means. Everyone does. Touch, in this world, is declaration. That night, Yun brings you a rice cake with a golden stamp pressed into the top. From the kitchen's overflow, she says, but you know what she means. Someone noticed your lantern, someone appreciated it. Maybe not enough to summon you, but enough to send sugar, a gesture in return. And while you sit, eating slowly, you think of Will-O-Wisper in her new quarters, surrounded by warmth, guarded by proximity, drifting on the soft promise of a future that may or may not exist. You wonder how many women have passed through that same stage, carrying possibility, sleeping next to danger, smiling through paranoia. You think of her hands resting over her stomach. You think of the way she laughed once, and you wonder if she'll survive long enough to laugh again. The imperial mother doesn't walk. She arrives. That's the only way to describe it. You hear her before you see her. The faint tapping of her jade-inlaid cane, the soft rustle of 10,000 threads of silk, and the slight shuffle of an entourage that seems to take up more space than physics should allow. And then, she's there, filling the courtyard like incense smoke. Beautiful from a distance, choking up close. You're summoned along with 15 other mid- and low-tier concubines to kneel into the pavilion of ancestral virtue. It's not optional. Nothing involving the emperor's mother ever is. She is, technically, a retired empress dowager, her formal power folded away like an old banner, but everyone knows she still pulls the strings. She's the spine of the inner court. Her word can undo marriages, override promotions, erase names. She once reportedly banished a noble consort for daring to wear a hair ornament too similar to hers. You've heard she has never smiled with both eyes. You're about to find out. The kneeling begins, your third row, centre. Not the front, thank the heavens, but not invisible either. Close enough that if she wants to ruin your year with a single sentence, she could do so with eye contact alone. She enters flanked by attendants in soft blue silk, all moving in eerie synchronization like fish in a stream. Her face is powdered, hair sculpted into an elaborate arrangement of gold combs and pins, each representing something symbolic: loyalty, strength, patience, and probably latent cruelty. She sits on the elevated dais, arranges her sleeves, and gazes down at the half-circle of women in front of her, with the sort of expression one might wear when surveying a garden full of plants that need pruning. You lower your gaze and keep it there, hands folded just so, shoulders relaxed but alert. This is the performance you've been training for. Then the questioning begins, not from her directly. She never deigns to speak so openly. Instead, her lead attendant reads from a scroll. Names, ranks, accomplishments, grievances. The tone is polite, but the content isn't. Snow Orchid, your stitching on the ceremonial banner was uneven. Jade Vale, your poetry was deemed too sorrowful for springtime. River Echo, you reportedly contradicted the physician last week. Please explain. Each girl stammers or bows deeper or offers the court-appropriate version of, "I'm terribly sorry, I will reflect deeply." No one is punished on the spot, but everyone knows this is the prelude. The real consequences come later. When your name is called, your stomach tightens into a knot of ice. You keep your tone level, you bow deeply. The scroll notes your recent embroidery work, your poetry presentation, your gift at the moonlight gathering. You hold your breath. Then a pause, noted for discretion. That's all. 3 words, and yet they wash over you like cool water, not praised, not condemned, just acknowledged. By the imperial mother, that counts as high praise. You exhale slowly, heart still racing. As the review continues, you steal a glance, quick and careful, toward the dais. She is watching Peony Spring, not Willow Whisper, not you. Peony Spring, the girl who has been summoned 4 times in the last 2 weeks. The girl who wears her hair differently now, more elaborate, more ambitious. The girl who dared to send a carved swan made of snow to the Emperor last night. And the Imperial Mother? She is not pleased. You see it in the slight narrowing of her eyes, the tilt of her head, the sharp, silent way her fan closes. Peony Spring is marked. You can feel it. And here's the truth that nobody whispers out loud. The Emperor's attention means nothing if it displeases the woman who raised him. Historically, the role of the Empress Dowager was often more powerful than that of the Emperor's wives, or even the Emperor himself, especially when he was young, distracted, or easily manipulated. These women shaped dynasties, orchestrated marriages, and removed threats. Their political reach extended deep into the inner court and beyond. In many dynasties, the Dowager chose who could see the Emperor, who could rise, and who would conveniently retire to a faraway temple. In fringe cases, the Dowager would even choose which children lived. There are records of baby boys who disappeared quietly, inconveniently, their mothers reassigned to serve in forgotten halls. The reason? They were born of a woman not favoured by the Empress or by the Dowager herself. So when the Imperial Mother closes her fan at Peony Spring, it's not just a gesture, it's a verdict. After the ceremony ends, you file out with the others, careful to bow again before leaving the threshold. Outside, the courtyard feels colder, despite the spring sun. You glance at Peony Spring as she walks past. Her face is tight, her lips slightly pressed, her hands tucked into her sleeves to hide the trembling. You say nothing, you don't smile, you don't nod. You do exactly what she would do if your places were reversed. Nothing at all. That night, the Emperor doesn't summon anyone. The next day, Peony Spring is invited to the meditation hall in the far wing, a place reserved for reflection, obedience, and silence. She disappears behind the golden doors, and no one speaks her name for 3 days. Meanwhile, Willow Whisper remains untouchable. You unexpectedly receive new silk thread, imperial dyed, and an upgraded seat in the embroidery chamber. Yun notices first and says with the faintest grin, "You're moving up," without moving at all. And that's the real skill here, isn't it? In the harem, forward motion is dangerous. Too much heat draws attention. But stillness, strategic, deliberate stillness, That's how you survive. Because it turns out the most powerful woman in the palace isn't the one sharing the emperor's bed, it's the one who made it. There's a rule in the harem, unspoken but universally understood. Curiosity gets you remembered, and not in the good way. Asking questions is like tossing coins into a dark well. Sometimes you hear the splash, sometimes you hear nothing. Either way, someone's always listening. So when you find the book, tucked beneath the cushion of your embroidery bench, your first instinct is to pretend you didn't. It's small, worn, its silk cover faded to a ghostly blue. The title has been scrubbed away, probably on purpose. The temptation is immediate. It hums. Forbidden things always do. You look around. The other girls are bent over their hoops, heads bowed, lips slightly parted in the dreamy fog of repetitive stitching. The eunuch chaperone is half asleep, fanning himself with one hand, eyes half-lidded like a bored lizard. Slowly you tuck the book into your sleeve, heartbeat thudding so loudly you're sure it must be visible in your throat. Back in your quarters, after Yoon has swept the floors and folded your outer robes and vanished into the hallway like a whisper with legs, you light the smallest oil lamp you own and open the book. It's not poetry, it's not scripture, it's not even court-approved history, it's philosophy, and not the dry, droning kind they recite during morning meditations. This is personal writing. Reflections, arguments, questions scrawled in narrow, slanted brushstrokes, marginalia, underlined phrases, ink blots where someone clearly hesitated before finishing a thought. You recognise the style, vaguely. It resembles the older schools of Confucian commentary, but this isn't approved reading for women, especially not concubines. One passage catches your eye. Obedience is mistaken for virtue, submission mistaken for harmony. The obedient woman is not always the moral one, only the silent one. You read it twice. Then again, you should burn this immediately. But you don't. Instead, you wrap it in an old silk sash and hide it beneath your bedding. You spend the next few days looking at everything a little differently. The senior concubines offering bowed greetings now seem more like diplomats than lovers. The eunuchs look less like guardians and more like silent scribes, absorbing everything, remembering what matters. Even Yun, scrubbing the floor with her usual blank expression, seems like she might know more than she lets on. And you, quiet, careful, halfway up the ladder, start to wonder if playing this game might not be the only way out. The harem has never encouraged women to think deeply. That's not its purpose. Beauty, obedience, and a womb willing to bear heirs, those are the currencies. Education? Dangerous. A woman who reads is a woman who might question, a woman who might resist. And in this place, resistance doesn't come with a dramatic exit. It comes with silence, a sudden illness, a transfer to the cold palace where no one returns. Historical records are cagey on just how literate the average concubine was. Some dynasties encouraged basic reading and writing, if only for etiquette and poetic performance. Others forbade it entirely, but every now and then a story leaks through, like the Qing concubine who wrote hidden letters in the margins of religious texts, or the Tang-era noble lady who kept a secret journal in code, using flower names to describe court politics. There's even a fringe legend of a concubine turned ghost, who supposedly haunts the palace library, weeping not for lost love, but for the book she never got to finish. You begin sneaking moments with your book, late at night, early morning before the sun hits the lacquered window panes. The passages become familiar, the ink stains like landmarks. Sometimes you trace the brush strokes with your finger, wondering who the original owner was, a disgraced consort, a sympathetic eunuch, or maybe someone like you, quiet, curious, just smart enough to be dangerous. One evening, while practicing zither scales in the music chamber, you hear two senior concubines whispering near the moon gate. Their voices are low, sharp, carrying just enough meaning to make you freeze mid-note. She was reading again. She thinks no one notices. She'll notice soon enough. You pluck the string too hard. The zither hums like a snapped wire. They don't say who they're talking about. It might not be you. It could be one of the others, someone bolder, someone less careful. But that night, you move the book to a new hiding place, sliding it behind a loose tile near the foot of your bed. You sprinkle dust back over the crack. Then you lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether knowledge is really worth this kind of terror. And still, You keep reading. One passage in particular burrows into your mind. To know the rules is to obey them. To understand them is to outlive them. You repeat it silently during embroidery drills, during meals, during posture training. It becomes your charm, your mantra, your mental escape tunnel. One afternoon, Yoon finds you staring into space while sewing and says, "Your hands are moving, but your eyes are far away." You blink and smile, just counting stitches. She gives you a look that says she knows that's a lie but won't press. Later, she sets down your evening tea and whispers, "Don't read when the oil burns too low. Shadows are louder than words." That's the closest she's ever come to admitting she knows. And that's the thing, you're not alone. You've never been. There are others scattered like beads in the folds of the palace. Women who pretend they're just admiring the garden when they're actually listening to whispered names. Women who compose love poems by day and political metaphors by night. Women who stitch clouds while plotting storms. You're not foolish enough to think you're special, but you might be careful enough to survive. There's an open debate among historians about whether concubines had intellectual lives beyond their performances. Some say no. Life was too regulated, too fear-driven. Others argue that repression breeds ingenuity, and that the palace, for all its cruelty, was also a crucible for strange, silent brilliance. Maybe both are true. Maybe you're living proof. The next time you walk through the pavilion of scholars, you don't look at the display scrolls. You look at the eunuch sweeping the floor near the archives. He pauses when your footstep echoes. You nod. He nods back. And suddenly the walls of the palace feel less like a prison and more like a maze you're beginning to map. You don't need to be the cleverest, you just need to be clever enough. It's just after the morning bell when smoke curls into the sky from the western wing. At first, you think it's incense. The breeze carries a scent that isn't unpleasant. Bitter. Woody. Not unlike the sandalwood coils that burn during prayer. You're sipping your tea when the screaming starts. Not a lot of it. Just a single sharp note like glass shattering across a lake. That's when you know something's wrong. You eyes instinctively, but before you can step into the corridor, a eunuch appears at the threshold of your room. His face is blank, but his eyes are too wide. "Remain indoors," he says. So you do. You sit back down and pretend to read the scroll on your lap, even though your ears are stretched toward the sound of frantic sandals and distant coughing. The smoke is thicker now, visible through the slats of your window, rising in long threads toward the painted rafters of the eaves. "Fire," Yoon says flatly, stepping into the room without ceremony. She closes the shutters. "Servant quarters, 3rd level, maybe 4th, they'll say it was an accident." "They always say it's an accident," you reply. She doesn't argue. She walks to your trunk, opens it, and begins folding your best robe. "If they evacuate us, wear this." "You think it'll spread?" She shrugs. "Walls catch. So do reputations." You hear later, much later, that it was started by a knocked-over lantern, or perhaps a maid's cooking brazier left too hot, or maybe the fire just started because someone decided it should. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is who was inside when the smoke thickened and the doors locked. One name comes back through the whispers. Spring Reed. You freeze when you hear it. You haven't thought of her in days, not since her quiet fall from favour. She'd been walking a fine line after Peony Spring's demotion, and Willow Whispers rise. Too smug, too visible. Maybe she knew something. Maybe she said something. Or maybe she was just in the wrong wing at the wrong time. She isn't dead, but she's not well. You hear the details in fragments. Burned feet, scorched hair. Her voice gone. Not from injury, but shock. She hasn't spoken since they carried her out of the smoke. She's moved to the Quarters of Mercy, a place where fallen concubines go to recover. Or to fade. The phrase you keep hearing is, "She's being looked after," which means she's being watched. Fires in the palace aren't common, but they're not rare either. Historical records describe several major blazes in harem quarters over the centuries, each one loaded with suspicion. The most infamous occurred during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong, where an entire wing of favoured concubines was destroyed overnight. Officially, faulty oil lamps. Unofficially, a purge buried under ash. The debate continues even today. Were these accidents, acts of sabotage, or simply the price of cramming hundreds of volatile women into ornate wooden cages? You sleep poorly that night, the scent of smoke lingering in your hair despite 2 baths. The sky outside your window is bruised, heavy with soot. The walls feel thinner, the air more flammable. You dream of fire, not hot, not painful, just silent, creeping flames licking across silken screens. You try to run, but your slippers melt to the floor. When you wake, your hands are clenched so tightly your nails have left half-moon marks in your palms. The next morning nothing has changed, except everything has. Willow Whisper is moved again, this time to the Pavilion of Morning Light, a private suite closer to the Emperor's quarters. The implication is obvious. Her pregnancy has been confirmed. The Emperor has acknowledged it. She is now more than a concubine. She is a vessel. You are given new duties, temporary ones, overseeing the assembly of baby linens. The assignment is framed as an honour. Only the most trusted hands are allowed to handle the fabrics destined for royal children. But you know it's also a test. One frayed edge, one missed stitch, and suddenly your loyalty is in question. You stitch clouds into blankets, stars into caps. You cut thread with exacting care, each motion slow, deliberate. You don't speak unless spoken to. You keep your eyes down and your ears open. Yun brings you news in pieces. The Imperial Mother has not spoken of the fire. The Emperor visited the Pavilion of Morning Light at dusk, stayed for 2 hours, then left without a word. Peony Spring has reappeared, barely. She walks with her head lower, her robes duller. She speaks only when necessary. She has been given a new flower name, Silent Orchid. It's meant to sound poetic. It really just means you are no longer relevant. You keep sewing. One afternoon, while adjusting the hem of a tiny ceremonial robe, you prick your finger. The blood is bright, sharp. It beads instantly. You press it to a cloth, quickly hide it. No one notices, but the moment stays with you. Because in the palace, even a drop of blood can become a story. There's a fringe account from the Qing archives about a concubine who intentionally pricked her finger before handing the emperor a robe she'd sewn, hoping he would feel her devotion. He did, for one night, then never summoned her again. You don't try anything like that, you know better. But still, the sting lingers. That night, Yun brings you a small bowl of mung bean soup. "To cool your body," she says. You nod, grateful. She sits with you while you sip. Neither of you speaks. The room is dim, the lamp turned low. Outside, somewhere in the deeper halls, a bell rings, soft and low. Not a summoning, not a ritual, just time passing. You wonder if Springreed can hear it from her bed in the quarters of Mercy. You wonder if she dreams of smoke. You wonder if when the walls catch fire, anyone will believe it wasn't on purpose. Because in the harem, the flames may be accidental, but the timing never is. The linen room smells like milk, starch and nerves. Everywhere you turn, hands are stitching, folding, brushing tiny garments free of lint with exaggerated care. The tension is invisible but thick, like steam rising from a pot that no one dares to lift the lid on. And at the centre of it all is your assignment, the blanket. Not just any blanket, the one that will swaddle the Emperor's child the moment it takes its first breath if it survives that far. You've never sewn anything this small before, or this important. The fabric is fine enough to snag on a sigh. The border must be embroidered with symbols of health and long life, but nothing too ornate. It must suggest good fortune without arrogance. The thread is red and gold, blessed by a monk 3 provinces away, and every stitch you make with it feels like a prayer you don't fully understand. You try not to think about the girl who was assigned this job last time. June Orchid, you remember her. Quiet, laughed too loud once and got reassigned to the laundry. Rumour says she sewed a swaddle with the wrong character on it, used peaceful instead of pure. The difference is subtle in script, but symbolically it was interpreted as implying the child wouldn't survive. She was gone by morning. You check your characters 3 times. Willow Whisper is now 7 months along. You haven't seen her face to face in over 2 weeks, but you hear the updates like ripples in still water. She no longer walks. She's carried in a small covered sedan by 2 hand-picked eunuchs. Her meals are blessed. Her quarters are fumigated. No flowers are allowed nearby in case of pollen. No candles, too much smoke, no sudden noises, bad for the womb. She lives now in a kind of floating isolation, more symbol than woman. There are stories about women in her position, women who glowed under the Emperor's eye, who carried precious cargo, who were adored until they weren't. All it takes is one fainting spell, one false contraction, one dream where the Emperor wakes uneasy, and suddenly the glow dims. Reverence becomes caution, caution becomes distance. The palace has a long memory for disasters and a short one for affection. You spend most of your days now in the nursery wing, helping to prepare for the child who does not yet exist. You fold dozens of cloths, arrange silver bells on embroidered hats, tie knots into charms that will hang above the cradle. You're not allowed to touch the cradle itself, of course. That's reserved for someone 3 ranks above you, but you're allowed to polish the dragon-carved legs. You do it carefully, respectfully, almost reverently even as your mind wanders. One day you arrive to find the cradle moved. Just a few inches, no explanation, no comment, but it's enough to spark whispers. Someone dreams the wrong dream, maybe. Or someone had a feeling. That's the thing, superstition here outranks science. Omens mean more than medicine. A bird nesting near the Emperor's window? Good. A mirror cracking during a bath? Very bad. A fish dying in the lotus pond near the Pavilion of Morning Light? Catastrophic. And last night, apparently, it happened. This morning, the entire pond was drained. The surviving fish were relocated. The gardener hasn't been seen since sunrise. You don't know what this means for Willow-Whisper. No one does. Yun, when you ask, just says, bad water, bad luck. You look up from polishing the cradle legs. Do you think she'll carry to term? Yun blinks slowly. I think she'll carry as long as they let her. That stays with you. The Emperor, to his credit, still visits. Not as often, not as publicly, but you hear the guards shuffle outside her quarters some evenings, and once you saw the back of his robe disappear behind the inner screen. It was enough to remind everyone she's still favoured. For now. You begin to notice new layers in the palace's rhythm. There are suddenly more offerings left at the temple altar. Small coins, folded prayer strips, fragrant bundles of herbs. The senior concubines attend more ceremonies. The imperial mother prays longer. Everyone seems to be holding their breath. And beneath it all, you can feel the tension building like pressure in your fingertips. Because if she gives birth, safely, if the child is male, everything shifts. Not just for Willow-Whisper, but for all of you. A favoured concubine with a son becomes a node of power. An axis. Promotions pivot around her. So do alliances. And rivalries. If the child is female, that's still valuable, but not in the same way. Girls are pearls, boys are keys, and if she miscarries, then her body will be quietly cursed for its failure, and she'll return to the ranks of the barely remembered. There's a fringe tale from the Mughal court of a concubine who bore 3 girls in a row. Her first daughter was celebrated, the second politely acknowledged. By the third, she was accused of draining the emperor's virility and forced into a religious retreat. The emperor never visited again. You spend your nights restless, alternating between dreams of tiny fingers grasping embroidered silk and nightmares of cradles rocking in empty rooms. Then, just before dawn one morning, the bells ring. Not the usual pattern. 3 short, 1 long, then silence. Yun enters before you can ask. She's gone into labour. You rise, your hands are trembling. You shouldn't be affected. It's not your child, it's not your body. But somehow you feel the tension anyway. Because whatever happens next will change everything. By the time the sun rises, the palace is humming. Soft footsteps, whispered orders, the clatter of silver basins. You're assigned to fetch more hot cloths. You aren't allowed near the Pavilion of Morning Light itself, only the highest-ranking ladies may assist in such a moment. But even from your position in the outer halls, you can feel the ripples spreading outward. The imperial physician is summoned, the imperial midwife too, and the senior eunuch who oversees the medical archives. That means it's serious. That means they're preparing records already. You spend the day in a fog of preparation and avoidance. No one smiles. Everyone is listening. By twilight, a cry breaks the air. Sharp, small, not a woman's, a child's. You freeze. For a heartbeat, no one breathes. Then you hear the call. It is a son. The words echo. They ripple down the corridors like wind through wind chimes. You don't know who speaks them first, only that they're picked up by every servant, every concubine, every cook, and handmaid and eunuch within earshot. It is a son. You sit down on the stone bench outside the linen room, your fingers still wet from rinsing cloth. Yun is beside you before you even realise it. She did it, you murmur. Yun nods, her eyes never leaving the direction of the cradle room, for now. Because in the palace, birth is not the end of the test.
It's the beginning of a new one.
The nursery isn't what you expect. For something so revered, so carefully prepared, it feels quiet. Not empty, but muffled. like someone took the whole room and swaddled it in layers of silken silence. No laughing maids, no cooing women gossiping over the crib, just stillness sweetened by the faint scent of sandalwood, honeyed rice, and something else you can't place. A tension that smells like fear in disguise. You don't see the baby, you're not important enough for that, but you do see the cradle. It's been moved again. This time beneath the window where sunlight filters through an etched lattice, casting delicate shadows across the lacquered floor. A painted screen has been added, something with cranes and pine trees and auspicious clouds, clearly chosen for the imagery of longevity. The symbolism is loud, the baby is healthy, the future is secure, at least that's what they want people to believe. But no one really trusts beginnings here, and a royal birth, especially the birth of a son, unleashes a very specific kind of paranoia. Now, everyone is watching everyone else. The child, barely a few days old, already has a rotating roster of attendants. Not just nurses and wet nurses, but guards, physicians, astrologers, record keepers, and 2 high-ranking eunuchs tasked with overseeing the nursery rotation. Every cloth is inspected, every bowl of soup tasted first. Even the temperature of the bathwater is documented. You hear whispers that they keep a second baby robe on hand at all times, just in case the first is cursed by accident. You're assigned to help with the outer linens again, and though it's menial work, your proximity to the cradle earns you new eyes. Girls who previously ignored you now greet you with low bows. You start finding little gifts outside your door, fragrant soaps, a folded note of poetry with no name, a small satchel of dried plum candies. You don't touch any of them. You're not stupid. That's because you've already heard what happened to the girl who did. Mist Flower, a junior concubine, accepted a gift, a ribbon with silver threads, and wore it in her hair during a garden stroll. 2 days later, she was accused of seeking attention while in mourning for her own brother, who had died months earlier. Too frivolous, the court said, too indecorous. She was sent to the House of Reflection, a place where women recite sutras until they either reach enlightenment or fade into irrelevance. No one's quite sure which happens first. The lesson is clear: you can be near made of power, but don't act like you have it. Meanwhile, Willow Whisper has become a figure from a legend. She's barely seen now. She stays in her quarters with the child. She doesn't eat with others. She doesn't attend rituals. Everything is brought to her: gifts, prayers, performances. They say she hums lullabies learned from her childhood village. They say she hasn't slept more than 2 hours at a time. They say she's afraid to hold her own son unless someone else is in the room. One night you ask Yoon, is she happy? Yoon's response is immediate. That's not the word you use for someone in her position. What's the word then? Yoon thinks for a moment. Useful. You try not to let that chill your bones, but it does. The baby, officially unnamed but informally referred to as Little Dragon, is inspected daily. His weight is recorded. His feeding schedule is mapped out in ink. A birth chart is created using the hour and minute of his arrival, consulted by 4 separate astrologers, each of whom declares his fortune auspicious, though one of them, according to rumour, hesitated before saying so, and hasn't been seen since. There's a fringe historical theory, found in a 15th century scroll buried in the Forbidden City, that royal babies were sometimes copped if they cried too much. A good omen does not wail, the scribe wrote cryptically. Most historians dismiss it as superstition, but you can't help noticing that Little Dragon is rarely heard, or seen. You've caught glimpses of his tiny hands, a faint hiccup once behind the silk screen, but no crying, just silence. You begin to notice the increased presence of guards, especially at night. They patrol the nursery halls in pairs, silent as shadows. The oil lamps are always lit, even past midnight. It's for safety, they say, but no one quite believes it. And then come the gifts. Not for you, obviously, but for the baby. Elaborately carved jade toys. Robes too small to wear but embroidered in thread spun with gold. Wooden tigers for strength, cranes for longevity. Peaches carved from amber to symbolize immortality. But all these tokens aren't just gestures. They're politics. Every gift has a name behind it, every name a family. They're not just celebrating, they're staking claims. And Willow Whisper, still recovering, is surrounded by expectations too heavy to bear. So the child gets a nursemaid who never blinks, and a food taster who drinks more soup than she serves, and an astrologer who revises the birth chart after an eclipse. And behind it all, the imperial mother, watching with the quiet menace of someone who has outlived 4 emperors, and buried more grandchildren than you'd want to count. She has not publicly commented on the birth, but she has sent a prayer scroll, white silk, red ink, folded exactly once, no note attached. Yun saw it with her own eyes. That's either a blessing, she told you, or a warning. And either way, it's probably true. Because there's one thing everyone agrees on now: the child has changed the game. Concubines who were once allies now avoid one another. Small cliques have reformed, some praise Willow whisper in the presence of the Emperor's attendants. Others whisper that she's unfit, too fragile, that perhaps the child would be better raised by someone more stable. You hear it during bath hours, under the splash of warm water, or over calligraphy drills, when brushes pause just slightly between strokes. They're circling. One morning you pass Silverfish in the garden. She smiles at you with all her teeth and says, "Have you started sewing for the next child yet?" It takes you a full second to understand, then you realise she's not asking about clothing. She's asking if you've been summoned. Because the Emperor has a son now, and he's looking again. You can feel them watching you now, not just glancing, not just curious, but watching, like hawks perched in embroidered sleeves, their eyes following your movements with the kind of precision usually reserved for scholars reading oracle bones. You used to walk freely between the linen room and the garden path, but lately each step feels heavier. The air around you is a little warmer, a little closer. It's like the palace itself has turned slightly in your direction. You haven't been summoned, not yet, but you've been seen, which, in the harem, is the first and last warning all at once. You hear the change in the way people speak to you. They're suddenly more polite, not warm, never that, but careful. Your name is spoken in full, your fan is handed to you with both palms. One morning you receive a bowl of candied lotus seeds at breakfast, an error, the eunuch says, meant for someone else, but he doesn't come back to retrieve it. That night, you hear laughter through the walls, not close but loud enough to float through the hallways, laughter that doesn't belong here. Male voices, guards, eunuchs, visitors from the outer court maybe, drunk on wine and forgetting the rules. Yun looks up from folding your robe and mutters, "The gates were open today." You blink. For whom? They won't say, but one of them asked me if I was the nursemaid for the poet Concubine. She snorts. You've been promoted without your knowledge. You don't respond. You just sit a little straighter, your mind swirling. The next day you're assigned a new corridor for embroidery practice. You don't question it, but it's closer to the Emperor's path, his evening route through the garden that leads from the Hall of Jade Authority to the Pavilion of Morning Light. You spend most of your time stitching clouds into curtain borders while pretending not to hear the shuffle of imperial sandals just a stone wall away. Once you catch a glimpse of him, just a siver of yellow silk, his shoulder disappearing behind a lacquered screen. His voice low and even, answering a question you don't hear. You press your needle too hard and pierce your fingertip. The blood blooms instantly on the fabric. You manage to fold it away before anyone sees. You stitch in silence for another hour with a different cloth. Later that evening, Yun brings you a basin of warm water and a clean bandage. As she wraps your finger, she murmurs, "Do you want it?" It's a simple question. Heavy. You don't answer. Not because you don't know, but because you're afraid to say it aloud. That night, you dream of the garden. Only it's not the one you know. It's darker, wilder, overgrown with thorned branches and ash trees that haven't bloomed in years. You're walking barefoot. The ground is soft and cold. You hear the Emperor's voice, but you can't see him. When you turn toward it, all you find are your own footprints. Deep, endless, circling. You wake up with sweat on your neck and the strange taste of old incense on your tongue. The next morning, a new maid is assigned to help you with hair arranging. Her name is Lynn, and she's too chatty, which means she's not really a maid. She adjusts your hairpins with unnecessary comments, how graceful your neck is, how your new robe complements your skin, how many knots of silk she's seen recently among the more senior concubines' robes. Yun watches all this from the corner of the room and says nothing. But later, when Lynn leaves, she whispers, "She's a recorder." You glance up. "A what?" She reports what she sees, what you say, what you wear, to whom you bow. It gets added to the registry. You sit in silence for a long time after that. Then you change your robe. You choose the older one, faded green. Clean but plain. You knot the sash the wrong way on purpose, you walk a little slower, smile a little less. Let them think you're not ready. Let them think they're early. Because ghosts move better when you forget they're there. Speaking of ghosts, you start seeing her again. Spring Reed, or what's left of her. She's been reintroduced to the tea hall slowly, carefully, as if she's something fragile and possibly cursed. Her feet still bear scars and her voice is a whisper, but she bows with perfect timing and wears a robe with silver embroidery. Not new, but maintained. When she sees you, she doesn't smile. She just holds your gaze a moment longer than necessary. You nod, nothing more. But that night, under your pillow, you find a slip of paper. 4 characters written in faint ink. Not all flames die. No signature. No need for one. The ghost has spoken. The harem is full of ghosts. Not dead ones. Living ones. Women who were too bold, too smart, too favoured. Women who were forgotten. Repackaged, renamed, reassigned. Women who speak through gestures now, through glances, through coded embroidery stitched into sleeves and left in plain sight. There's a fringe belief among some palace historians that the ghosts of former concubines linger in the halls, not as apparitions but as echoes. That the palace, so saturated in longing and fear and love and blood, has developed a kind of memory. That when you hear a door close without sound or a candle flicker in a room with no wind, it's not coincidence, it's continuity. You begin to believe it. One night, while walking back from the baths, you pause by the Hall of Forgotten Scrolls. You're not supposed to be there. It's sealed most days, full of records no one reads and names no one utters. But the door is slightly open. Inside, the shelves are packed. Dust glows in the moonlight. Scrolls wrapped in ribbon, tied with string, buried beneath newer records. You shouldn't enter. You do anyway. You pull the first scroll your hand finds. It's dated 3 emperors ago. A list of names of concubines lost to fire, illness, and exile. The ink is faded, but one name is underlined. You trace it. The name doesn't mean anything to you, not yet. But it will. Because this is how the harem remembers, not through monuments, but through whispers, through threads, through blood on silk, and through girls like you, too clever to be caught, too careful to be crowned. The morning comes thick with fog, the kind that clings to skin and turns stone paths into rivers. You step outside and feel like you've wandered into a dream, or perhaps a memory too large to wear. The garden is empty. No attendants sweeping fallen petals, no birds chattering from the rooftops. Just stillness and the quiet sound of water dripping off carved eaves. You tighten your robe around your shoulders and move through it slowly, each step soft as if the earth might echo. Today you're being summoned, not for embroidery, not for tea service, not for another politely veiled interrogation disguised as etiquette training. No, today you're being summoned to the Chamber of Harmony, where the Emperor receives private performances, poems, songs, stories, the kind of space that's both innocuous and heavy, where women are brought to be remembered or dismissed. You were told last night by the head eunuch, who knocked once and said your name with perfect neutrality. Yoon just nodded afterward. She didn't say anything, didn't ask if you were ready. She only laid out your finest robe, the one with pale cranes embroidered at the hem, and began boiling the rice water to rinse your hair. All day you prepare, hair arranged with amber combs, skin brushed with powdered pearl. No fragrance, just the faintest dab of rosewater behind your ears. You're dressed in 3 layers, all light enough to float. You feel less like a person, and more like a message being folded into silk. You arrive just after sunset. The Chamber of Harmony is dim, lit by red candles in gold holders, the scent of warm osmanthus tea curling through the air. You kneel at the prescribed angle. A eunuch stands beside you, silent, hands folded, unmoving as a statue. You're told to recite. You choose a poem you wrote 3 weeks ago, nothing scandalous, a meditation on mist rolling across the mountains. It's safe, polished, not too clever. But your voice stays calm, your breath steady. You don't forget a line, you don't stammer, you finish and bow your head. And then, silence. You wait. Still silence. You don't look up, but you hear a soft sound, a finger tapping against wood, then a quiet murmur. You've been reading more than court-approved poems. Your breath catches, just slightly. Don't worry, the voice continues. I prefer women who think. You don't respond, you wouldn't dare. But inside, your pulse is thunder. That night, you return to your quarters unaccompanied. No one congratulates you. No gifts arrive. Yun meets you at the door, takes your robe without a word, and brings you a warm cloth to wash your hands. She doesn't ask. She just waits. After a while, she says, "He asked for you again." You stare at her. "He remembered?" Yun nods. "Not many do. After the first time." That word again. First. Because the truth is, most girls get one chance, maybe two if they're breathtaking, or convenient, or if a senior official requests it on behalf of a cousin sister's niece. But for someone like you, quiet, careful, deliberately unremarkable, it means something else. It means he's not just looking, he's remembering. So you're summoned again. And 2 days later, same chamber, different arrangement. This time he speaks before you do. He asks your opinion on a poem. One he read earlier that day. He recites a line. It's misquoted. You hesitate. And then, because you're tired, because you're human, because you've been rehearsing this moment for months, you correct him. Gently, respectfully, but still. There's a pause. Long enough for you to think this is where it ends. Then he laughs, just once. A low, surprise sound. You're not afraid of me. You don't reply, because of course you are. He asks you to sit closer. You do. The conversation continues. About literature, about the fog that morning, about the sound of cranes when they take flight. You speak carefully. You make no jokes, you make no assumptions, and you never ever make eye contact unless invited. The third time you're summoned, it's different. No poetry, just tea. You pour for him. You do it exactly as you were trained. 3 turns of the wrist. Half a finger of headspace left in the cup. You set it down and step back. He doesn't drink. He looks at you. And for the first time, you wonder if he knows your real name. After that night, your world shifts, subtly, deliberately. You're assigned a new sleeping chamber. Larger. Closer to the Emperor's path, the window faces the east, where the morning sun slides across the sill like warm silk. Your meals improve, not lavishly, just enough to remind you that someone is paying attention. The dumplings arrive still warm. The fruit is ripe. The tea is never bitter. The other girls begin to notice. Some smile more often when they pass you. Some frown. One offers you a tray of candied almonds. Another accidentally spills rice water near your slippers. You accept both gestures the same way, silently, with a bow. Yun remains unchanged. She simply says, "Don't get comfortable." You don't, because history's full of favourites who fell. There's the case of Consort Jen, beloved by the Guangxu Emperor, executed by order of the Empress Dowager in a fit of political preservation. They tied her in silk, threw her down a well. Her name was erased. Her poems were not. And of course the favourite of Sultan Ibrahim I, tormented by rivals until she lost her child and her place in the harem. Forced to serve tea to women who once bowed to her, she survived. But only just. There's always a risk in being remembered. You lie awake that night, watching the shadows shift along the lacquered ceiling, feeling the weight of proximity pressing against your chest like a too-heavy robe. You remember what Yoon said. Useful. You are now. But for how long? And to whom? At the very edge of sleep, you hear a voice in your head. Not the Emperor's, not Yoon's, not your own, but something deeper, older, like it's rising up through the stone beneath the palace. It says, "The closer you fly to the centre, the more the walls remember your shape." You don't sleep at all after that. 30 isn't old, not in the world outside, not where village women carry toddlers on their hips while sowing fields and bartering over bundles of onions. Not where men grow their first beards at 25 and are still considered boys. But inside the harem, 30 is a death sentence, or, more accurately, an expiration date. The moment when you stop being a blossom and start being a withered branch. There's no fanfare, no mourning, no farewell scroll in cursive poetry, just a quiet shift in language. You notice it first in the way the eunuchs address the older concubines. They stop calling them by flower names. No more Jade Magnolia or Snow Orchid. Suddenly, it's just Madame Lin, Lady Sue. Titles that sound elegant but land heavy. Titles that mean your story is over, you're now part of the scenery. This week you turn 29. You don't tell anyone, but Yoon already knows. Of course she does. She brings you a piece of lotus cake early in the morning, cuts it in half and says, "Eat it now." After this they'll pretend you don't like sweets. You both laugh. A little too loud, a little too bitter. The cake is soft, mildly sweet, and tastes like everything you've tried not to want. You've been summoned 4 times now, not in a row, not obviously, but it's enough that the guards at the Chamber of Harmony nod when they see you. Enough that your robe is replaced without asking. Enough that your name has stopped appearing on chore rosters. You're no longer in the linen rotation, no longer required to pour tea for visiting wives of minor ministers. You exist in a liminal space now, between favoured and replaceable, between remembered and retired. And around you the senior flowers are fading. Lady Yi, your poetry tutor, once luminous, once clever, has developed a cough that keeps her up at night. She still recites verses in the garden, but her voice is thinner, her skin pale beneath her carefully applied rouge. When she sees you now, she nods with distant approval, like a teacher watching her student approach the edge of a cliff. "I had a son once," she says one evening unprompted. "He lived 10 days, just long enough to be named, just long enough for them to remember how expendable I was." You don't know what to say, so you don't say anything. She doesn't seem to mind. Other older concubines disappear more discreetly. One is said to be ill. Another has chosen a religious life. One is relocated to the Western Garden, which everyone knows is shorthand for not needed anymore. You pass them in the hall sometimes, dressed in simpler robes, their hair braided low instead of pinned up. They wear smiles like paper masks. They don't speak unless spoken to. They don't move too quickly or too slowly. They are trying to vanish with dignity. In rare cases, one is promoted to palace scholar or ceremonial attendant. Roles that sound important but mostly involve arranging incense and correcting the posture of younger concubines. A reward for good behaviour, a cushioned fall. You overhear a younger girl ask, "Do they cry when they're sent away?" The answer is whispered. Only the ones who believed they'd be loved forever. You don't believe that. You never did. The harem is not built for love, it's built for proximity, utility, the balancing of power and bloodlines. Affection, if it appears, is incidental, a side effect, like heat from a lantern you're not allowed to touch. Still, being near the emperor has changed you. Not just your status, or your meals, or the texture of your pillow, but the way people speak to you, the way they look at you, like you've tasted something they haven't, something they want, or something they fear, but that proximity comes with an expiration. The emperor is nearing 40 now, still strong, still sharp, but his gaze has begun to drift toward younger women. Girls barely 15, newly arrived from distant provinces, plucked like seasonal fruit. They walk awkwardly, giggle too easily, but their eyes are hungry. You see one, Peach Willow, wearing a robe in your colour, pale green, crane embroidery. A coincidence, maybe. Or maybe someone in the wardrobe hall is signalling that the emperor has a new preference. Yun notices too, she says nothing. But she begins laying out your older robes again, the ones you haven't worn in months. You fold them with steady hands. The open debate among scholars is whether concubines over 30 had any real agency, or if their so-called promotions were simply acts of soft banishment. Some argue that those who survived longest did so through humility and withdrawal. Others say they formed shadow courts of their own, advising, influencing, cultivating alliances. There are stories of a Grey Lotus society, an informal circle of older concubines who helped determine which girls were worthy of advancement and which ones needed to be redirected. No records confirm it. But you like the idea. You start walking the garden paths at odd hours, not to sulk, just to see, to watch the younger girls practicing their bows and recitations, to listen for the names rising in favour. You smile at them when they look your way, the kind of smile that says, "I was you. You may be me soon. Be careful." One morning you wake and find that your calligraphy brush has been replaced. New bristles, carved jade handle, a note attached in delicate script, for the poetry you have not yet written. No name, but the seal at the bottom is unmistakable. The Emperor's. You run your fingers over it. Not smiling, not crying, just thinking. You sit down, you pick up the brush, you write a single line. A flower can bloom again in memory, if not in the garden. You don't submit the poem, you fold it into your robe and carry it with you, because 30 may be the end of one chapter, but it might be the start of your ghost story, and if the harem forgets you, you'll still know how to haunt it. The new quarters are quiet, too quiet. You can hear your own breathing, and occasionally the soft plink of water dripping from the roof tiles onto the stone walkway outside. No maids bustle in and out, no eunuchs arrive with schedules or errands. The walls here are thicker, and the doors creak less. It's the kind of place meant for contemplation or exile, depending on who you ask. This is your reward. They don't call it a retirement, they call it a placement, a transition, a gesture of respect for your years of service and elegance and discretion. That last word, discretion, carries weight. Everyone in the palace hears it and understands the subtext. She saw things, she said nothing, she behaved well. So now she disappears with honour. You have a garden, a real one, small, mossy, overgrown in a controlled sort of way, the kind of garden you might have dreamed of as a girl before you knew how many things a dream could cost. There's a koi pond with sluggish fat fish, a crooked pine tree that leans against the wall like it gave up centuries ago, and a single stone bench so cold it hums through your bones when you sit. There's no schedule here. You wake when you want, eat when they bring you food, walk when the weather allows. Yoon is still with you, somehow. She requested to stay, or someone arranged it. You don't ask, she doesn't say, you haven't been summoned in 3 months. Not for poetry, not for embroidery, not for anything. You are officially no longer part of the inner harem. You're not alone here, though. There are others. Quiet women. Older. Some you recognise, most you don't. They move slowly through the corridors, their hair streaked with grey, their eyes glassy from too many candlelit years. They don't speak much. When they do, it's about food or weather, or nothing at all. One of them has taken to writing on leaves with a pointed twig. She sets them afloat in the koi pond, then watches as they sink. You don't ask her why. You have a title now. Honoured Consort Emerita. It sounds impressive. It means nothing. You can't leave the grounds. You can't attend ceremonies. You can't wear red. Your letters, if anyone ever sent you any, would be read, copied, filed away. You're still property, just older and quieter. The historical records call this the gentle descent, a phase in which favoured concubines are respectfully removed from view, usually after childbearing years have passed. They are moved to less visible residences, given titles that sound like rewards, and slowly replaced by women half their age. Some enter nunneries, others take up painting. A few become shadow advisors to younger women, but always quietly behind closed doors. The Ottoman court had a word for this stage, cafes, or the cage, but in some translations it also meant the cage with a view. There's a fringe story about a former favouriter who trained sparrows to carry messages to the gardens below. No one knows if it's true, but the symbolism is poetic enough that it's been retold for generations. You write poems still, but only for yourself. Short ones, barely longer than a breath. The clouds no longer watch me, they've moved on to another roof. You don't write them to be clever, you write them to remember how to shape words, to give yourself some edges in a world that's starting to forget you. Some days you get visitors, not often. A young concubine once assigned to carry your tea, now bows deeply and thanks you for something you don't remember saying. She's wearing your old colour, pale green, cranes at the hem. Her hands tremble, she doesn't meet your eyes. You nod, offer her a bowl of plum wine and say, "It passes faster than you think." She doesn't understand, she will. You hear rumours still, carried in the clatter of serving trays and the gentle betrayal of 2 loud whispers outside your door. The Emperor is ill. Or maybe not. Willow Whisper has not appeared in public since the baby was moved to the education wing. The Imperial Mother is fasting. Or maybe mourning. Or plotting. No one knows. Everyone guesses. And you, once a whisper, then a name, then a title, are now just a shadow behind a silk curtain. But that's where the power is, isn't it? Because shadows can watch. And remember. One evening, as the sky turns the colour of old lacquer, Yoon brings you a bundle. It's wrapped in grey cloth, tied with plain twine. No seal, no message. Inside is your old hairpin, the one shaped like a crescent moon, long forgotten, thought lost. You hold it carefully, tracing the worn metal. Who sent it, you ask? Yoon shrugs, but her eyes betray her. You don't press. Instead, you take the pin and slide it into your hair, even though you haven't worn it in years. It's too ornate for your status now. It's inappropriate. You wear it anyway. That night, you sit in your garden and watch the fish rise to the surface, their mouths gaping at nothing. You drop a few crumbs into the pond and whisper the name of a poem you never finished. You think of Lady Yi, long gone now, of Spring Reed, who survived fire and disappeared anyway, of Peony Spring, renamed Silent Orchid, who lives somewhere in the western wing speaking to no one, of Willow-Whisper and her son growing up in the halls you'll never see again, and of the Emperor, who still has not said your real name aloud. Maybe he forgot, maybe he never knew, but the walls remember, the silk screens, the scrolls buried in the archives, the servants who watched and never spoke, the stone tiles worn smooth from your steps. You are not a favourite anymore, but you are still here, still breathing, still remembering. It starts with a letter that doesn't arrive. You don't expect one, of course. No one in the gentle descent expects correspondence. It's not that anyone forbids it, it's that silence becomes the default. But somehow the absence of a message is louder than anything you've heard in weeks. Word travels slowly in this part of the palace. It has to travel through too many hands, too many filters, and yet, one morning as you're sipping warm barley tea beneath the crooked pine tree, you catch a phrase whispered between two passing attendants. He hasn't spoken in days. You don't ask who, you already know. The Emperor's dying. No public announcement has been made, not yet. But you've lived in this palace long enough to recognise the signs. The sudden stillness of bells that once rang at dawn, the disappearance of flute music during meals, the way the corridors smell less like incense and more like boiled herbs, and the new silence, thicker, older, clings to the walls. You tell Yun nothing, but she feels it too. She starts closing the window shutters at night, even though it's summer. She boils your water longer. She wakes earlier, moves more slowly, listens harder. Then one morning a small package appears outside your door. No seal, no ribbon, just a flat wooden box wrapped in red string. Inside a folded scroll and beneath it your poem. Not a copy, the original, the one you never submitted. A flower can bloom again in memory, if not in the garden. It's written in your hand, you feel a strange flutter in your stomach, part dread, part awe. Someone kept it. All this time. The scroll is brief, 7 characters, each inked with the care of a calligrapher who knows he's being read for the last time. They do still bloom, you know. No name, but the brushstroke on the final character, the long trailing tail of the bloom, is unmistakable. You sit for a long time holding the box, your hands trembling secretly, the tea forgotten beside you. You don't know what it means, not really. A farewell, a memory, a reminder. You're not summoned, not even now, but something shifts inside you. That night, you pull out every poem you've written in the last year. You smooth the creases, re-ink the faint ones. You organise them, not by date, but by mood, by shape, by ache. Yoon watches silently, her fingers folding the edges of your older scrolls with reverence. Are you submitting them? She asks finally. You shake your head. I'm remembering them. For days, the air grows heavy with anticipation. The palace does not grieve openly. Not yet. But it prepares, the way it always does, with silk and prayer beads and long walks down polished corridors that lead nowhere. You think of history, of emperors who lingered for weeks, or fell in a single afternoon, of power slipping through fingers like river water. There's a recorded case from the Song dynasty of an emperor who, on his deathbed, called for a concubine he hadn't seen in 20 years. She came, holding a pomegranate he once gifted her. He died before he could speak. The pomegranate rotted in her room untouched. You wonder if you're carrying your own version of that fruit. The second rumour arrives folded into the laundry, an accident, perhaps, to a message. Yun finds it, a fragment of silk with 2 words embroidered into the hem, Little Dragon. You haven't heard that name in months. The child, Willow-Whisper's son, the Emperor's heir, and he's still alive, he's still in the palace. And now he may be next. You sit with that knowledge like a stone in your chest. The boy is barely walking. The harem is already aligning itself around him, which means everything is shifting. Again, you see the signs clearer now. The women who once faded into the background are suddenly reappearing in public spaces, strolling the gardens, praying longer at the shrine, requesting audiences they have no reason to request. And Willow-Whisper? No one's seen her, not publicly. It's hard to say if she's being hidden or protected, or both. There's talk of new alliances, of families vying for influence over the child, of a regent being chosen, of the imperial mother quietly assembling her own court behind closed doors. Yun hears it too. One evening, as you light a candle, she says, "They'll use the boy like a weapon." You look at her. She adds, "And the mother like a shield." It's not bitterness in her voice, just certainty. You write a poem that night knowing you'll never read it aloud. He does not cry like a prince. He cries like a boy, in a room where no one is allowed to hear him. You roll the scroll and place it inside the wooden box, next to the poem that was returned to you, next to a small bundle of plum blossoms dried months ago. You don't want to forget. Not that you could, because the harem may have stopped looking at you, but you are still watching them. The next day a girl appears outside your quarters. 16 maybe. Pale eyes, long fingers, a new robe that doesn't quite fit. She bows low and stammers a greeting. I've been sent to observe, to learn. You glance at Yoon. She nods once, expression unreadable. The girl is young, too young. She doesn't know how to kneel without wobbling or hold her sleeves the right way. But she tries. You pour her tea, she flinches. You tell her, don't be too clever, but don't be too soft. She blinks. What should I be? You pause, then say, quiet, but awake. She nods like she understands. She doesn't. Yet. You think of the cycle, the inevitable arc of it all. Girl becomes favourite. Favourite becomes memory. Memory becomes whisper. And in some quiet corner of the palace, a girl like you sits with her own box of poems and wonders whether she was ever truly seen. But this time something is different. You've seen it now. The full shape of the wheel. The way the palace moves. Sometimes gently, sometimes with teeth. You've survived its gaze and its silence. And now you're becoming something else, not a ghost. Not yet. But something close, a witness. The morning they announce the Emperor's death, the sky is clear. Painfully so, no clouds, no breeze. Just a stretch of bright blue. So blank, it feels like a mistake. You wake to the sound of the morning bell, one long note, low and trembling, followed by 5 shorter ones. A pattern that hasn't rung in years. The air seems to freeze around it. You don't rush to the door, you already know. Everyone does. It was only a matter of time, but now it's official. The Emperor's gone. You sit by the window, still in your night robes, and sip your tea slowly. There's no ceremony for you to attend. No role for you to play in the procession. Your mourning robe arrives in a folded bundle by the mid-morning. Grey silk, plain stitching, the colour of ashes left too long in the brazier. Yun lays it across your bed, smoothing the fabric once. It begins again, she says. You nod but say nothing. In the outer courts, chaos simmers beneath layers of ritual. The inner court, however, remains frozen. That's how it works. Still water on the surface, currents underneath. The announcement is read aloud in formal halls, scrolls dispatched to provinces, seals passed from trembling hands to ambitious ones, and within the harem, everything sharpens. The mourning period is strict. No laughter, no music, no painted lips or scented oils, no bright fabrics or polished hairpins, just silence, prayer, and endless, precise gestures of reverence. But grief here is not what it looks like outside. No one cries, not publicly. Crying is a luxury. A signal that you had something real to lose. For most women in the palace, the Emperor's death is not heartbreak. It's exposure. Now the question hangs heavy in every corridor. What happens to us? Willow Whisper is no longer a concubine, she's the mother of the heir. Her fate is still uncertain, but everyone agrees she's untouchable, for now. She's reportedly been moved to the Pavilion of Ancestral Light, closer to the Imperial Mother's wing, surrounded by guards and advisors and women who only speak when spoken to. Her son, Little Dragon, is too young to rule, which means someone else will. A regency, an interlude, a power struggle wrapped in silk and paper lanterns. And you're no longer even a pawn. You're a piece taken off the board long ago, watching the new game begin from the edge of the table. Still, there's movement around you. Former favourites resurface. Old rivals appear at temple ceremonies in their mourning robes, eyes downcast but glittering with calculation. Even Silent Orchid, the girl once known as Peony Spring, makes a rare appearance. Her hair is shorter now, her robe simpler. She looks straight ahead and bows with perfect form, but you catch the faintest flicker of something under the surface. Memory, maybe, or defiance. You see it everywhere. Women who were once discarded now shifting into new positions, not out of favour but out of view. And the ones who have stayed quiet, like you, are starting to matter again. Not for beauty, not for charm, but for what you remember. Because in the vacuum left by the Emperor's death, information becomes currency, and suddenly your past is valuable. You receive a visitor 2 days into the morning, not the emperor's son, not the imperial mother, not even a fellow consort, but a eunuch, high-ranking, impeccably dressed, voice like paper being folded. He bows just enough to acknowledge your former rank, then presents you with a sealed scroll. You open it. Inside, a list of questions, all about the emperor, his habits, his reading preferences, his views on particular ministers, whether he ever spoke of his son's education. You look up, expression unreadable. Why me? The eunuch blinks slowly. Because he remembered you. It's a strange kind of intimacy, isn't it? To be called upon not as a lover, but as a witness. To be asked to document the man you once recited poetry to while your knees ached on lacquered floors. You answer carefully, not too much and not too little, enough to remain useful, not enough to be dangerous. The next morning, a new hair comb appears on your table. Simple, bone white, no inscription. You know exactly what it means. We see you. You place it gently in your hair and say nothing. History is full of forgotten women who left no records, but sometimes they left signs. There's a fringe theory among court historians that after a ruler's death, the women closest to him, those consorts who once shared his breath, his moods, his silences, played a subtle but decisive role in shaping the official narrative, what they chose to emphasize, what they omitted, what they suggested in scrolls, in mourning rituals, in the way they folded their robes during ceremonies. You understand that now. You're being asked to curate a memory. Not his, yours, a version of him that will live in scrolls and rituals long after the living have forgotten the real man. And in doing so, you're writing yourself back into the story. You spend the next days in quiet work, drafting poems for temple readings, advising younger women on how to bow at the proper angle during remembrance rites. You're not in charge, but you're no longer invisible. And Yun, your shadow, your witness, smiles more often now. Only slightly, only when no one else is looking. Do you regret it? She asks one night as she brushes your hair. Regret what? Not clawing your way higher. You consider, then, I didn't fall, that's enough. She nods. You both know many who did. That night you write another poem, not to share, just to keep. He ruled for 20 years. I survived them, and now I sit among the koi, listening for footsteps that no longer come. You fold the scroll and place it in the wooden box with the others. The morning continues. The bells ring. The boy prince is seen once in public, carried in ceremonial arms, blinking against the sunlight. He doesn't wave. He doesn't cry. He just stares at the sky as though it might open. You understand that stare. You wore it once. Now, from your small quiet corner of the palace, you watch the next story begin. And you wonder what shape your memory will take when someone else finds your name in a list. You hear her before you see her. The measured step, the deliberate rustle of silk that announces a presence too well trained to stomp, but too important to whisper. You're sitting beneath the pine tree again, writing another half-finished poem about cloud shadows on water, when Yun stiffens beside you. That alone is enough. You don't turn, you don't stand. You simply place your brush aside, straighten your spine, and lower your eyes. The Imperial Mother arrives like a change in weather. She doesn't speak right away. She never does. It's one of her favourite weapons, the pause. She lets her silence unfold like silk between you, heavy with implication. When she finally sits, it's not beside you, but slightly higher on a raised stone platform that once held a sundial. You can feel her looking at you. You are quiet, she says. I have become so, you reply. She nods, as though you've confirmed something for her. Then, you were never the most beautiful or the most cunning. You bow your head in agreement. It's not a compliment. It's not an insult, either. Just a fact, placed between you like a cold cup of tea. And yet, she continues, he kept your poems. Your breath catches. Just barely. It's enough. She knows. Of course she does. There are no secrets in her shadow. I don't keep them, you say. No, she says. You write them. That's more dangerous. You finally glance up. Not too directly, just enough to catch her eyes. They're unreadable, like all things that have lived too long and seen too much. Do you know, she says, what the new ministers want to do with us? You don't answer, not because you don't know, but because you do. She continues without waiting. They want to dissolve the old orders, dismantle the inner court, modernize, make us less visible, less powerful. Still you say nothing. And what do you think of that, she asks. This time you speak carefully. I think anything that wants to forget women like us will eventually fail, because it misunderstands what memory is. She watches you for a long moment. Then she smiles, not warm, not kind, but almost satisfied. I need scribes, she says. Women who remember. Your pulse skips. You will write the history of this place, not the version the ministers want, the real one. She doesn't say you're honoured. She doesn't say this is a promotion. She doesn't need to. The message is clear. Your pen is now your weapon. And your cage. She stands. Her robes fall around her like ripples on water. Start with the Emperor's final year. Use your own words. Don't make him a hero. You bow deeply this time. Yes, honoured mother. When she leaves, you stay kneeling until Yoon touches your shoulder. She chose you, Yoon whispers. No, you say softly. She preserved me. That night you don't sleep. You lay out your scrolls in a line across the room, your old poems, your fragments, your unsent letters. You gather the pieces like bones, ready to stitch them into something that breathes. Not flattery, not fiction, truth. But truth in the palace is never clean. It must be clever. Dressed in metaphor, shadowed in myth, it must pass through the filters of elegance and subtlety and danger. So you begin. Not with his name, not even yours, but with a scene. A girl, kneeling by a lacquered screen, reciting a poem about cranes and mist, while the Emperor watched without blinking. You write how her voice didn't tremble, but her fingers did. How the embroidered hem of her robe was fraying and no one noticed. How, afterward, he forgot her name but asked to see her again. How that contradiction became the whole of her existence. You write of the others, Springreed and her fire, Willow Whisper and her silence, Lady Yi and her son who lasted just long enough to hurt. Peony Spring turned into Silent Orchid, and the girl in green who once wore your face, You write of the bathwater filled with rose petals and fear. Of poems that meant nothing. Of poems that meant everything. Of how women became empires within themselves, lived just to survive one more day behind painted walls. You write of him, not the man, the presence, the weather pattern you shaped yourself around, the gold thread stitched into your life without permission. And as you write, something shifts. You begin to see yourself not as an echo, but as a chorus. You aren't the only one who watched, who waited, who endured. You are simply one voice among hundreds, and now you are writing for all of them. The forgotten, the faded, the clever ones who played their role so well no one saw the cost. By dawn your hand aches, your robe is wrinkled, your lamp has gone out, but your page is full. Later that morning a younger concubine knocks at your door. She carries tea with shaking hands. They told me you record things? You nod. I saw something, she says. You pour the tea. She speaks, slowly, awkwardly, of a conversation overheard between ministers, of decisions already made, of names being erased. You write it down, and not all of it, just the part that matters, because now you choose what survives. And this is how the harem lives on, not in titles or children or beauty, but in words tucked between silk scrolls, in verses remembered long after the body fades. You are no longer his, you are no longer theirs. You belong to the memory of the palace, and memory, as you well know, never bows. The day they move the boy to the Southern Academy, the sky opens up. Not with rain, no, it's too dry for that, but with wind, sudden and biting, tugging at banners and fraying silk sashes as if the palace itself is shivering. You feel it before you see it, that hollow pull in the air, the hush that falls over courtyards as the sound of small ceremonial drums begins to echo down the halls. This is not a procession, it's a message. Little Dragon is now officially the heir in training. Still not emperor, he's too young, barely 7, but the gears of power are grinding into place. A new court is being built around him. Tutors, advisors, handlers. You hear that Willow Whisper did not accompany him, that her health has declined, that she asked for silence and was given a closed door. Whether she chose to be left behind or was quietly shelved, no one will say. You stand at your window and watch the dust kick up in pale spirals. You remember the first time you heard him cry behind that silk screen in the nursery. You remember thinking he didn't sound like a prince, just a child born into a cage. And now that cage is larger, better furnished, but still locked. The Empire will feed on him like it fed on you. And you are now the record keeper. Not by title, but by necessity. Your scrolls have grown into a second life. They line the shelves of your room, each tied with pale blue ribbon, categorized in your own private way, lies believed, truths unspoken, things almost said. You know no one else would understand the system, but Yun, ever patient, has begun memorizing the order anyway. She has not left your side in years. Some days you think of asking her why, but you already know. You are two ghosts circling the same pyre, waiting to see which one would vanish first. Now you keep each other tethered. The younger concubines visit more often now, quietly. At first, they come under the pretense of paying respects, then they stay longer. One brings a poem, another brings a question. One girl, barely 16, face still round with youth, asks if it's true that the Emperor once read aloud to you. You smile. He read badly, but he tried. They laugh the way girls laugh before the world sharpens its teeth. It's soft and unsuspicious. You let them believe what they want, that maybe it was romantic, that maybe for a moment it meant something. And you remember the exact moment you stopped being in love with him, not with the man, but with the idea of mattering. It was the day he called you by a flower name that wasn't yours. A gentle mistake, an easy one, but in it you heard your expiration. You smiled, bowed, corrected nothing. You never heard your real name from his lips again. Now, every time you dip your brush in ink, you anchor your name in the bottom corner of the scroll, not large, not bold, but present. Not a petal, not a pseudonym, just you. That is your defiance. History as recorded by the court scribes will leave out the scent of the baths, the exact ache of kneeling too long on stone, the internal scream of being remembered only for your quiet. But your history, your version, doesn't need permission to exist. And now it lives in the hands of those girls, in their copying, in their questions, in the way they sit with you, not because they're told to, but because something in them knows the importance of listening. There's a fringe theory that some emperors had secret consorts, unlisted, unacknowledged, kept entirely in shadow. Women who were too clever, too dangerous, or too beloved to be public. Historians call them the unseen lineage. No evidence survives, of course, just a handful of poems, unsigned and uncategorized, found centuries later hidden inside the binding of palace record books. You like to believe that. You like to imagine that memory, too, can rebel. Yoon has begun assembling your work into formal collections. You never asked her to. She just started doing it. Tied each scroll in silk bands, pressed dried petals into the corners, inked labels in her small, sturdy script. You pretend not to notice when she stays up late, adjusting the order, muttering dates. One morning she places a bound volume on your table. It's simple, handmade, cream-coloured silk cover, no title. Inside, your story. One you wrote with hesitation, with heartbreak, with 1,000 edits made in the margins of your soul. You trace your fingers along the spine. Do you think anyone will read it? You ask. Yoon shrugs. If not now, later. She doesn't need to say more. You both know the palace forgets until it doesn't. You've lived enough versions of yourself to understand that truth is not a thing carved in stone, but written in breath. And breath lingers in tapestries, in old robes, in garden stones worn by silent footsteps. The bell rings again outside, 3 notes this time. Evening prayer. You don't move, you simply sit, warm tea in hand and your scroll beside you. The window is open, a breeze finds its way in, cool and scented faintly with plum blossoms. You're not supposed to smell blossoms during morning. But this is your garden, your air, your ending. Later that night, as the stars slip one by one into their quiet places, you write the final lines of your final scroll. I survived a king, I buried my name in silk, and still, I wrote. You sign it with your real name, no flower, no mask, just you. You seal it, you hand it to Yoon, then you sleep, and somewhere in the hush of forgotten corridors your name begins to echo. Not loudly, but enough. So, you made it, you survived. Barely, maybe. Maybe only in fragments, with pieces of yourself hidden in scrolls and silence, but still. You're here. You breathe through every ink-stained corner of that palace. You endured more than silk and poetry could ever make soft. You loved carefully. You fell quietly. You learned when to bow and when not to. And somehow you came out the other side, not as someone's possession, but as someone with a voice. Buried maybe, but not broken. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive life as a concubine. Not all the way through. Not with your opinions, or your sarcasm, or your habit of asking inconvenient questions like, why does this gold room smell like repressed trauma? No. Most likely you'd make it a few months, get exiled to the tea storeroom for misusing the Emperor's favourite metaphor, then spend your days stealing extra dumplings and composing haikus about revenge, which, honestly, not the worst outcome, but even if you wouldn't survive it, she did. The one in the story. The one who began as nothing and ended as memory. She saw the game and didn't feel or flinch. She wrote her way through it. She watched empires turn to dust, lovers become legends, and girls become ghosts. And in the end she claimed the only thing they couldn't strip from her. Her voice. Maybe that's the point of all of this. Not the palace, not the emperor, not the title pinned to your robe or the powder on your face. Maybe survival is not about rising through the ranks, but staying whole when no one expects you to. About remembering your own name even when no one else does.
So now, lie back.
Feel the weight leave your shoulders. Let the story settle in your bones the way old ink settles into parchment.
The palace is quiet now.
The lamps are low, and somewhere, across all those years and silk-covered walls, a woman just like you is still writing by candlelight.